All right. Well, actually, I should have. Hang on 1 second. Yeah, I purposefully delayed the start of this particular. Well, I was busy with something else as well, but this, I was like, not only did I start late, but as soon as I start, my roommate decides to start doing dishes, so there's that background noise. I don't know if you guys could hear it, but it was very distracting for me. Okay, yeah, running a little late. Give me 1 second. I am going to send off an email real fast. I just got notification here. Somebody else may be joining me here. All right, let's leave that and double check this. Yeah, sorry about that. I've got work stuff at the moment. What is going on there? Okay, no new information there. All right, that's part of the reason why I am starting later than I had planned. Is actually anybody in the live chat? Probably not, but we'll double check that. It has been one of those weeks. Yeah, it looks like Google it's there, but who cares what Google it has to say? Yeah. Google, it's one of those people that it's hard to tell if they are a troll or if they are really that stupid. It's a mystery. All right, so where was I last week? Okay, so a couple little updates, and I want this to be the last episode that I make talking about this particular topic, not because I think we've exhausted or I've exhausted this topic or I've explained it completely, but there are other things that I want to chime in that are a little more time sensitive. One of the big things that happened this week, and I'm not going to be able to talk about it too much this week, although this would be the optimal time to start talking about it, is a recent, well, not only Alex Jones on Joe Rogan, but then I think it was the day after, Tim Pool, Jack Dorsey, and I forget her name because she's not a famous person, but she's like this, one of the chief executives of Twitter. Yeah, so they all were on, like, so it's Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, Jack Dorsey, and this other lady that I can't remember her name at the moment. Because yeah, it's not a well-known name, but they were all on that same stream together, and Tim Pool took them to task, just pointing out example of their hypocrisy with their the way that they enforce their rules, and the way that their rules are set up to help one side's views as opposed to the others. He continually kept hounding him on that, which, I mean, I was completely surprised by that. Tim Pool kind of strikes me as, while I like his middle of the road stance when it comes to journalism, I did not expect him to take a firm stance on this, because yeah, he was completely in the right, completely put him in, held their feet to the fire, unlike what Joe did with Jack Dorsey on his show previously. So I want to talk more about that, some of the topics they brought up. Also, Alex Jones acting like a crazy man, talking about interdimensional demons and aliens. Crazy, hilarious stuff from him. I don't know what else more I could say about that, but given that the topic is to continue with UPB. Oh, there's also another point that I wanted to bring up. So let me, if you forgive me for a second, I didn't have this prepped because I was working on something for my job. I got an email that something wasn't, that needed to be updated, and I had to fix that real fast. So let me pull up this video. You know, something recently. So there is a YouTube channel called Rationality Rules, although based on my experience with watching this guy's videos, there's nothing rational about his videos. And there's something that he brought up repeatedly and has brought up repeatedly in the past that I wanted to touch on, if I could find the video. Man, I didn't think it was that far back in my history here, but it looks like it is. Which means that I leave YouTube streaming way too long. No, because there's... No, it's got to be. I must have passed it. Made one of the videos. Let's see. No, that's nothing. I'm trying to do a quick search here on my history because I know. Because it was. So he made a video about Stefan Monalou and UPB, and then he made. So he was debunking UPB and did a terrible job. And then Stefan Monalou watched his video, ripped his arguments apart pretty soundly because the arguments were pretty poorly made overall. And so then this guy goes and makes a rebuttal video, and one of the big things that he makes the same false, I don't know, that's what I'm trying to get his words exactly. That's why I'm scrolling through the videos to find it. Let me... Yeah. Okay. There we go. There it is. That's weird. View history, although I've watched it. And the comment that I had made on this particular video is gone. Did he delete this video and then re-upload it? That's odd. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got his words directly, but based on this, I'm not going to be able to. He didn't respond to me, so I don't have any of that backlog. All right, I'm going to... So if I misquote him, I'm sorry. I was trying to get the direct words, but I don't want to sit here through a 16-minute video. I've already been rambling too much trying to get this particular... So basically, he was talking about Hume's law, and his understanding of it is that you cannot get an ought from an is. And yes, that is the simplified version of Hume's law. But that is not as Hume said himself. Okay, maybe I can at least look up that and get the exact quote there. So, because this is what he repeatedly stated, is that you cannot get an ought from an is. And if that is the case, then we can never get an ought. There's no way to get an ought from anything ever whatsoever. That is the problem with the way this rationality rules guys is using this. Because he's oversimplifying Hume's actual law. Because in Hume's words, let's see, there's a whole paragraph written here. Okay, so I'll read the whole thing. So in every system of morality, which I have hitherto met with, I have always remarked that the author proceeds from some time in an ordinary way of reasoning, proceeds for some time in an ordinary way of reasoning, and establishes the being of a God, or makes observations concerning human affairs, when of a sudden I am surprised to find the usual copulations of propositions is and is not. I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought or an ought not. This change is imperceptible, but is, however, of the last consequence. For this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation. 'Tis necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time that a reason should be given for what seems altogether inconceivable. How this new relation can be deduced from others, which is entirely different from it. But as authors do not commonly use this precaution, I shall presume to recommend it to their readers, and am persuaded that this small attention would subvert all the vulgar systems of morality, and let us see that the distinction of vice and virtue is not founded merely on the relations of objects, nor is perceived by reason. Okay, that's the exact quote. And then rationality rules tries to sum all that up by saying you cannot get an ought from an is. But by Hume's own words, the problem isn't that people get an ought from an is. The problem directly is that people are trying to implicitly get the ought from the is. You can get an ought from an is, but you have to lay down the rationality for why that is the case. You can't just say, this thing is, therefore you ought to do this. And that is what a lot of these, that is his complaint right here about moral arguments being made. X is the case, therefore we shouldn't do X, logically follow. Now, X is the case, and Y is the case, and B is the case. Like you can list out a whole list of scenarios of things that are. And you can also make this say, okay, if or since this is true, well, this will lead to that and that and that. And those consequences ultimately undermine. So you can make an argument from that is. I'm trying to come up with a good let me see. So I know I've read through this and okay. So at the bottom of this list, it says that there's a misunderstanding when it comes to Hume's law. Okay. Okay. So various scholars have also indicated that the very works of Hume are the ought is problem. Hume himself derives an ought from an is. Yeah, that's what Stefan brought up. By making the claim or the complaint about this is-ought dichotomy, Hume is making an ought from what is. What is people say X is true, therefore we shouldn't do Y. And he's saying that doesn't logically follow, and that is a problem. What he creates by doing so is an ought. X is the case, we shouldn't do X. He's created an ought from an is. However, he has given an explanation of why that becomes a problem. That's what, like that entire paragraph, he's saying, okay, this is what occurs, and this is why it is an issue, and why it shouldn't be done. because he's saying there is no logical connection between the two. What is the case is somebody says something and then immediately jumps to an ought. Like, this is true and it ought not to be done. And he says that is a problem. So he's claiming what is that people do this, they say something, and then they jump to a conclusion of how we should act with no real bridge in between. And yet he spends an entire paragraph building a bridge and building an argument around. It's like, well, that's the case, and here's why this is an issue, because there isn't that logical bridge between the two, and that creates a problem, because now you're trying to persuade someone of something they should do without any logical reason as to why. That's why we ought not to do it. But the way rationality rules tried to oversimplify this is you can't get an ought from an is. If that was true, then Hume's argument would be completely self-contradictory. Now, there is a distinction between is and ought, and that's what I accept, and that's what Stefan Montelou accepts. That's what a lot of philosophers accept. There is an ought and an is, and you need to bridge the two in order to make a valid argument. And that's exactly what I've been talking about over the past 2 videos and hours of talking about this particular thing. That's why Stefan spends so much time building up the foundation for his arguments, is he's bridging that is to ought. And it is a very complicated topic, because idiots on the internet come along and say, oh, Hume's law is just that you can't get an ought from an is, so why are you even bothering trying it? I'm like, that's not what Hume's law is. You may have gone to like Philosophy 101 and you were misinformed by your instructor. Like, I've never even taken a philosophy class, but all it took was 5 minutes of research to figure out, okay, is he actually misrepresenting Hume's law? And yeah, based on Hume's own words, he's misunderstanding Hume's law. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to think if I knew there was an example in here of something. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, reading through this, so the authors of this particular article are talking about that Hume is usually assigned the position that such getting an ought from an is impossible. That's not what Hume is arguing, based on Hume's own. So this is his arguments from A Treatise for Human Nature. Now, whoever is writing this particular summation of it gets it wrong as well, because they talk about it's impossible, and yet in his own argument, he's bridging from the is to the ought by making, because his complaint, let me see, for this ought or ought not expresses some new revelation or affirmation. 'Tis necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time that a reason should be given for what seems altogether inconceivable, how this new revelation can be deduced from the others, which is entirely different from it. That sentence right there, he's saying, okay, if you're going to go from that position, or from that argument, from that kernel of truth to what you are currently doing, you need to establish all of the logic between. You need to explain, give a reason why. That a reason should be given. Should be given. Now again, he's to the point where he's giving an ought, but he got there by making a logical deduction, saying if the entire purpose of making a moral claim is to change somebody's behavior, then you ought to give them a valid reason as to why they should change their behavior. And it is not enough to say X is the case, therefore Y. That is a faulty argument. That doesn't prove anything to anyone. Okay, one of the examples I think Rationality Rules used was this is something I've seen. Maybe he didn't say that in his video, but this is one I've heard when talking about Hume's law. In Hume's law, it says, so what you could say without Hume's law, or what an is ought, which would be incorrect, is that sex creates a child. Therefore, you shouldn't have sex unless you want to create a child. That's a problem. That is an illogical argument. Yes, sex does create a child, but you can also have sex for other reasons. Okay, but be prepared if you're going to have sex that a child can be a consequence whether you want it or not. That's hello.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry, just joining in, having some PC problems. Yeah. So the main issue you're having here, the difference between is and ought?
Yes. Well, that's the issue that was brought up. Is
all grapes are fruits, but not all fruits are grapes?
No.
So ought is what should happen, but is what actually exists? Or is how you got to what ought to happen? So
okay, okay.
Is the explanation. Yeah. Therefore, you must apply is if there is an ought.
No. So the is reality. So if we were having this particular discussion when slavery was the norm, the is would be the existence of slavery. The ought would be we need to abolish slavery. Well, how do you get to the abolish slavery by saying, well, slavery exists and slaves die, therefore we need to abolish slavery? That doesn't logically follow. But it does logically follow if you start laying out the argument, well, we've got this in our Constitution that says all men are created equal, and yet here you are treating, and black people are men, and yet here we are saying that all men are equal, and yet we're treating certain men unequally based on their race. That is a problem. That's where you can kind of get to this. And if you look at a bunch of the abolitionist writers who were talking about this particular issue, that's how they formulated their arguments. It wasn't just this is occurring and it's wrong. It was in order to be logically consistent, you have to apply these things consistently to all people. You can't just say all men are equal and then
So what you're saying is if they establish an is as this is moral, there has to be an ought to complete to fill in the gap of saying this ought to be the way things go.
When you're looking at the is, that is nature. That is what currently is. That is the is statement when referring to the is ought dichotomy is talking about.
Okay, so is just factual. What can be factual?
So it is a fact that it is slave. It is a fact that they were beaten and killed. It is a fact that would cause, well, that's, I guess, that was when a slave master beat their slave, it hurt their bottom line. Okay, but those things are just statements of fact and have no moral bearing.
All right.
The moral side of it is why you should have gotten. So it's applying all those things together. It's like, well, you said that all men are created equal. You're not treating these men equally. Also, when you mistreat your slaves, they run away, and it's also bad for your business. So you can formulate arguments based on multiple things that are and you can.
Well, I guess my question.
You can argue your case from what is, but not just. You can't just jump straight from what is to what ought to be. So that's the problem.
Essentially, I mean, I was there for your part one, and we kind of discussed basically it was the building blocks of this discussion.
Yes.
And establish that the idea of morality does exist simply based off of these basic building blocks.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I wasn't able to participate in part two, but I did catch. I didn't get the first 5 minutes of the discussion, but it sounds like you were trying to determine it almost seems like we need to determine what the difference is between is and ought, and
Yeah.
how is what is objectionable. It exists. There is no necessarily not a real debate about it. Maybe your perspective, but it still is. It doesn't matter what your perspective on slavery is. It still did exist at earlier times in the U.S. or other periods around the world. Slavery just existed in various forms, and it just is. Slavery is a fact of human existence. Ought is subjective. Ought is
that's
on what is, and then how to change is, or how to achieve a different perspective or rearrange what is. Ought is the line of logic or path to achieve whatever that change is, correct?
Well, that is sort of, except for the ought is supposed to be objective. But that's the problem that a lot of people have with morality. It's when they think ought is completely subjective, and it's just a recommendation, or it's your opinion on how things should be. Things are a currently things are X, and you're saying things should be Y. Okay, that's your opinion. That's your moral relativism. But the ought, when it comes to this, is okay. That is a objective ought. But you can get there from what is using logic and reasoning and deduction. That's the issue.
It does become subjective when there are multiple routes or multiple oughts. So, for instance, I'll just dumb this down. If I was going to fill in a picture, right? I've got a circle and I want to color the entire thing. I could say I ought to start from the outside in order to define my boundaries, and then fill in the interior once I have my boundaries defined of the circle. On the contrary, I can say I ought to fill in the interior first because I have more variance or more space or mistakes, and then tone down near the end to define my edge. Either way, it goes in the circle and gets to the same goal, but it's two different approaches.
Yes.
And so there is no objective ought unless you can scientifically prove which method will 100% be more effective than the other.
But that's kind of,
again, it's dumbed down.
No, I understand that, but the ought in this case is not how you get there. The ought is whether the circle needs to be filled in or not. That's what I'm trying to. If something is the moral case, then even if it doesn't quite matter how you get there as long as you get there. The only time that it would matter is if you're doing something immoral to get something moral, which you can't do.
We run into a conundrum, which the question is, should that object be filled in or not? That depends on the end goal. And if the end goal is viewed as subjective, then therefore ought is subjective.
Yeah, that's the case that we have right now. That so many people are arguing that whether it needs to be filled in or not is completely subjective. It's like that. So, for instance, instead of it being a drawing on a piece of paper, let's say instead it is a hole. And yes, you could fill it in starting from the outside, working it in, or you could fill it in starting from the inside, working your way out. Either way, the hole gets filled in. But in the meantime, it's a safety hazard like Parks and Recreation. And Chris Pratt is going to fall in and break both of his legs. That's okay, Chris Pratt is going to fall in and break both of his legs. That's why it needs to be filled in. That's okay. That is what is that there's a hole. What is that it is a danger hazard. And then when you actually have an example, it's like, see, we told you it was a dangerous hazard because somebody fell into it and injured themselves. That's why we ought to fill it in. If your goal is to protect people,
ought is whether it should continue to exist and do we have an effect on it?
Yes, for the most part. It's trying to determine, okay, that's what currently exists. Is that the way it's supposed to be? Because that's when you're talking about morality. Is that the correct action, or should a different action be taken? Because specifically morality is what you should do. These are when some things are considered moral, they are actions that you should take, the best possible action. So to be completely moral is making the best possible actions or the best possible choices that you could ever make. Someone who is 100% moral would make all of the best choices they could ever possibly make for themselves and others. Now, that's it's a pretty high bar to try to reach, but that's the idea of absolute morality when you're talking about from an objective stance. Like, if you had perfect knowledge, if you had perfect hindsight, you could go to the end of your life and look back at all the decisions you've made and look and see, okay, I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have done that. Well, if you could, rather than waiting till the end of your life, if you could do that from where you are, then you could live a completely moral life.
So what
making
if
all the decisions to get you to the end of your life that you want?
What if we're looking at this at somewhat of a skewed view? We're looking for absolutes, right? Is there an objective?
Yes. So here's the other thing: universal, absolute, and objective. These terms are all synonymous when talking about philosophy. So here's the issue that I keep seeing with JF and with this rationality rules and with other people is they like to use objective and act as if objective is not synonymous with universal, or they say universal and then apply it to a completely different definition, and they act as if objective and universal are separate things, or that absolute is something. And I'm like, when you're talking about philosophy, these terms are interchangeable. It doesn't make any sense, because there's no at least not any credible philosopher talks about these terms as if they are three separate things. And also the people who use them as three separate things offer no valid distinction between the three. They just say, oh, that's not universal. It's objective, but it's not universal. I'm like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say objectivity is universal. It is just the not the but the procedure on how to get there is subjective and may not necessarily be applicable or cannot be completed.
So that's an area that
if I knew beforehand that this guy was a serial killer and I had the opportunity to end his life in order to preserve 30 lives after, morally, I shouldn't want to kill anybody.
Yes.
Or this is the whole travel back in time and kill Hitler as a baby.
Yeah, yeah, and you heard, and Shapiro was talking about that. Like he got backlash over it because he said, no, it's a baby. What you should do is rather than kill him because I don't know or understand this argument. If you could go back, you'd kill him in the crib. I'm like, are you guys stupid? No, you just raise him differently
altogether.
If you could go back in time, you can teach him to not be Hitler.
Correct. In that instance, there are outs to that particular situation. But let's say you're stuck in a situation where you have zero choice, right? So I was watching Arrow, I think season 1 a few weeks ago, and the protagonist was, the Arrow had to make a choice while he's in the jungle. There was his newly acquired kind of girlfriend, Asian girl. I can't remember the lady's name. He met her kind of in the jungle, but I
haven't seen the series, so I don't know.
And then he found out the girl that when the boat crashed, the girl he invited on the boat, a close personal family friend that he was, relationship stuff aside, it was an old family friend that he was emotionally involved in as well. She got found. They both got knelt down, and there was the antagonist, this guy looking for a serum, and he basically said, I'm going to kill one, you pick which one I save. Right?
Yeah.
So his only choice was to jump in front of one or the other. Which one does he save? The girl who he recently got an emotional attachment, or the one who is a family friend who he's known for years, is the sister of his prior girlfriend? How does he choose? And even though you could say, yeah, the bad guy, his best choice would be somehow to disarm the bad guy and save both. That's like Superman level. That's ridiculous. In a situation, he had to pick one either to die. But is he at fault if he makes no decision and one dies? Or is he obligated to choose one over the other? And how does he make that choice? At which point is that subjective?
So that's the moral dilemma. Like would it be morally acceptable to push somebody onto a train track if it saves? In which case, so in that particular situation,
you're going to feel remorse over either.
Yeah, there is no possible correct answer.
But objectively, nobody should die.
Yes. So the objective,
from a moral standpoint, that bad guy should have just said, you know what, I don't want to end life either. That's what would make it moral objective, is neither person should want to end life.
Yes. So there's the objective moral standard, and then there's the practicality of life. So that's the issue.
So
like in that situation, the objective ideal is that no one gets killed. However, so let's say that let's make it a little so like in that, well, I'll get back to that situation with the two women, but let's make it a little more clear cut. So rather than choosing between two people that you have feelings for, instead you're choosing between the person who is attacking her and killing him. You're like, okay, I've got a choice. One of these two people is going to die. Do I kill the guy who's about to kill the woman, or do I let him kill the woman? Well, the general, I guess, the moral objective philosophy of this is you can take out or kill the aggressor in that situation and still be morally right. Yeah. Because there's no, because either way, like as I've talked about this on the show before, if you've got 100 people and one of those 100 is going to kill people and the rest of the 99, the most people that you can possibly get in this scenario is going to be 99. Because either the one person is going to kill somebody else or you're going to kill the murderer. There is no way to keep all 100 people alive. And that's what you'd find. So it's like, okay, in this situation, there's 3 people alive right now. At the end, no matter what you do, 2 people are going to be left alive. It's either you and the murderer or you and the woman he was trying to murder.
Yeah. But
pretty clear cut. So pretty clear cut on which action should be taken. Yes, you take out the murderer.
In that situation, yeah, that would be clear cut. Now, let's say someone had Hitler tied up, bound, gagged, and wanted to shoot him right in the head. This is post-World War II, right? Near the end. He didn't have a chance to shoot himself. He got captured. Another soldier comes up and says, I'm going to blow his brains out. And you say, that's against the Geneva Convention. He's now a POW.
Yeah.
What's your moral obligation? To protect Hitler?
Yeah, actually, which is...
there you go.
Yeah,
it's a tough decision.
Because the situation is Hitler is currently captured, and Hitler can't continue to enact his reign or kill people.
Yeah.
So that's, he becomes, okay, he has been neutralized. There's no reason for any more physical action, and yet this person is trying to take physical action against somebody who can't defend himself, is immobilized. The person who would take action against the prisoner is the aggressor.
If they were about to shoot and you jumped in front to protect Hitler from actually dying in that, in that scenario, does that make you immoral or moral? You're protecting a mass murderer.
So that's the.
Does that become?
And that's what Stefan gets on later in the book when he talks about, because he does get into the non-aggression principle, and that's entirely the idea behind the non-aggression principle. It is always the aggressor who is in the wrong. Anybody who stands up against the aggressor or anybody who protects somebody from the aggressor is morally right. That's the idea behind the non-aggression principle. Is anybody who is aggressing is the immoral actor.
There are still arguments against the non-aggression principle. Well, in that scenario, right? So if you look at, say, like the Hatfields and McCoys, back and forth. Well, you killed this person, so I got revenge. Oh, you got revenge, and now you killed my nephew. Now I'm going to come back and kill you, right?
Yes.
So at what point is the revenge no longer warranted, or do you think your average person would not feel that bit of regret or remorse from not having got compensation for their loss?
So there you touched on something else, the feeling, in which case your feelings do not justify immoral behavior. So in which case the Hatfields and McCoys,
no, not necessarily,
were warring for years.
Let's say
there were times when no war was going on, when nobody was dying, when nobody was attacking each other. Correct. There were years between but there was a family rivalry, and somebody was like, "Oh, you killed my brother or whatever," and now I'm in a position like when I was a kid, or you killed my uncle, or you killed my cousin when I was a kid, but now that I'm a man, I'm going to go out and take my revenge. It's whoever is initiating the revenge, because there is a stalemate. There is a period where nobody is acting. the one person who takes their emotions and goes and starts the feud again is in the wrong. And yes, it happened on both sides. So they'll be like, okay, well, the Hatfields are done fighting, and they've settled the score, and now they're at peace, and they're willing to call a truce. But the McCoys wouldn't be willing to call a truce, and then they would go out and launch an attack.
Okay.
It's always the person who is currently engaging in the hostile action, in the aggression, is the one incorrect.
And so maybe that was a bad example of Hatfields and McCoys, because they're constantly back and forth, and it's a revenge story.
But
multiply on top of each other. But let's take to say the death sentence. The purpose of the death sentence is because it is deemed that the individual who is put on death row is no longer capable of surviving or thriving peacefully within current culture or civilization, and the only option is to remove their life existence, basically.
Yes.
Because if at any point they were ever let go, they would continue right back into their previous habits and lives. So serial killers, and let's take the previous example, we captured Hitler. He's a POW.
Yeah.
Well, it's not to say if at one point we do make a trade, or we say, hey, everything's a truce, but the only reason we're going to draw a truce, you give us Hitler back. Otherwise, we're straight back to war. At some point, he gets delivered back. I mean, I don't know. This is hypothetical.
Yeah, this is all hypothetical, but it does bring up the issue.
Right back to persecuting Jews or blacks or whoever they were after, and they pick right back up where they left off. So, is, say, the executioner in a death sentence the aggressor?
No.
And why not?
So in that situation where it's the same, it would be a delayed in the same way that if somebody is about to, so like going back to the situation, if there's a murderer who's about to kill a woman and you stop the murderer by killing them, you are not in the wrong. Okay, well, in the same situation, Hitler is hell-bent on killing people. You tie him up and you stop him temporarily, and then at any time you unleash him, he is going to continue on his murder spree.
Okay.
So all that did is you rather than attacking him in the midst of the action, you've delayed his ability. But anytime you take your eyes off of him, he's going to keep doing what he's doing. It would be this. It becomes a situation where it's no different than killing someone in the midst of an act, because no matter what you do, they are going, if you don't end their life, they will continue to kill somebody.
Okay. And I get that. Those are all very valid points, so I understand that. Now, again, I'm throwing these philosophical or these rhetorical ideas at you just to see, kind of, not necessarily to poke holes, but test and prod to see what actually holds true. If there is an objective morality, it should always be objective, because that's the only reason to define it as being objective. Otherwise, it does fall into the category of subjective. So it kind of holds true that we would need to test that with various philosophies and ideas, just rhetorical concepts or what if situations to see, does this hold true? Which, in fact, that's kind of what we discussed in the first episode, is it has to hold true, otherwise it is not true.
Yeah, it has to hold true, and it has to hold true in all situations.
If someone was captured who, let's say, was a serial killer, but they said, hey, I'm sorry, and I'm not going to do it again.
Well, it becomes a situation where, although you would like to believe them, you shouldn't be so naive to think, oh, they just said they're changed their ways. No, somebody who has committed something that atrocious should be held separate from society, in which case then you don't look at execution, time in prison. And actually that's what we do with a lot of these serial killers and all. Like some of them are on death row depending on their states and that sort of thing. But the other side, because I recommended this show before, Mine Hunters, what actually the FBI and other law enforcement agencies will go in and talk to these people, and will either get assistance on finding other serial killers. This is not true to life. Like the Mine Hunters is those are real life serial killers, and real life what FBI did to actually get them talking and start recording the interviews and things along those lines.
I did watch that one.
Yeah. But in the fictional version, Hannibal Lecter, it's the same kind of thing. They kept him in jail, although he eventually escaped. Again, it's all fictitious and that sort of thing. We haven't had any serial killer escape from our facilities, to the best of my knowledge. We haven't had anybody like that escape. I think, what was that guy? Oh, what's his name? The guy from High School Musical is playing him in the new movie.
That's not Darcy, is it? Ed Gein? Is that who he's playing?
No, he's playing, but so he did escape from a jail, but not from prison. I forget his name. No, man, I'm drawing a blank on that guy. But other than that guy, none of these serial killers have escaped from federal prison. Bundy? Might be Bundy. I think he might be playing Bundy. I'll have to double check that. No, because yeah, I think it is Ted Bundy.
Yeah, that's the role he's playing.
Yeah. So
Al Bundy
got caught with it was sure.
Just joking.
Oh, I just got a message. Okay. Yeah, so Ted Bundy did escape from during the trial or something, somewhere around there when he was, I mean, basically he was awaiting his sentencing, but once he was in prison, yeah, he's in prison for life. Nobody, all of these people who are caught and put in prison never see outside of a prison wall. So Hannibal Lecter is the fantasy version that did escape, but while he was in prison, Jodie Foster's character, Clarice, I forget her last name, and then Edward Norton's character in Red Dragon were talking to him to get his assistance with tracking down other serial killers. And that part is not fantasy. While it's fantasy for this Hannibal Lecter guy to have this amazing insight and be able to tell him all these about these serial killers, that's kind of fantasy. But in real life, they do interview people who have these psychoses or these histories of being serial killers in order to discover pattern, in order to build profiles on the guys that they're currently hunting.
Okay, so well then I would say in order to make this kind of tangential side commentary here, a little shorter, basically, if we're going to get to, say, a moral objective that it's wrong to kill people, the only objection to that would be preservation of your or someone else's life.
Yes, so that's what it always comes down to when talking about the non-aggression principle.
Then you have the right to go ahead and pursue the end of someone else's life if they're in the act. However, if they're subdued and no longer have the capability, that harm is now out of the way, then there is no reason to kill. Instead, we should try and preserve life. In the case of the death penalty, it's more of if they are ever let go, they basically vocally state or show signs that if you ever let me go or I get out of here, I'm going to continue right back up where I left off.
Yeah.
So there's no rehabilitation, whereas those that say, hey, I'm sorry, I have something I can't control, I don't want to, I didn't mean it, they end up being kept for life, but they can still help serve a purpose of benefit to the rest of society. But that would still hold true to overall, you should not want to end anybody's life, and there should be no reason to end someone else's life unless they directly and are in the act of, or potentially in the act of, ending someone else's life.
Yes.
So pretty much just straight self-defense or defense of someone else who cannot provide their own self-defense.
The other instance of that is if we can no longer hold them in some kind of facility. Like if we are unable to, for financial reasons, keep them imprisoned for life, then it would be morally acceptable. Like, okay, if this person ever gets out, they're going to go and kill people, and well, it looks like we're losing our ability to keep them in prison for whatever reason. Although in the United States, we've got the
I guess that would bring up
surplus spending in our prison system and that sort of thing, but there have been,
so we had actually captured bin Laden rather than him being killed, right? We captured and imprisoned him. And the rest of the Taliban, the rest of the followers decided we're either going to start massive terrorist attacks until he's released, or if he turns on us, we're going to do massive terrorist attacks to try and get to him and kill him.
Yeah. So in that case, like, well, it doesn't. If we just end his life, then because it comes to a situation where you're like, okay, they're going to either try to break him out consistently. It becomes a central focus for them, and you're like, we can't keep this guy out of their crosshairs, or at that point, a public execution,
or
can't
protect him because they're out to get him.
So that's when you're in a situation where, again, you're trying ultimately what it comes down to when you're talking about objective morality, you get to this conclusion that the maximization of human life is an objective moral good, and you're trying to do the most that is reasonably possible in order to achieve that.
Now, so I'm glad you actually brought that point up, and I think that's where this discussion would have eventually led to. But the maximization of human life, I do not think, is necessarily a moral objective. So, for instance, to maximize human life, let's say on a health standpoint, would be no smoking, no drugs, no alcohol, but actually prohibition of certain meats, certain foods. Should we outlaw those because they do have a tendency to decrease lifespan? And therefore, is it behooving of those who are aware to outlaw or ban those, to say, I am simply attempting to maximize your life? Or is it that those people are intently and willingly imbibing in those substances because, it does help to aid in the fulfillment of life or to have a more enjoyable life? I like to eat bacon during breakfast, but it's not the best thing to eat. Does bacon need to be outlawed? Outlawed, and yada yada.
Well, that's the issue that a lot of people talk about. When you talk about moral issues, they always kind of revert back to, well, then you have to enforce them by law. That's not the case. The only moral issues that you must enforce by law is the protection of life. And the protection of property.
I think that would just need a redefinition, as in the moral objective is maximizing human life when it is not.
No, because this is where you have to apply this consistently.
It is non-consensual. Non-consensual shortening of a life. A terrorist attack, a murder, a kidnapping, or whatever. But if that person is willingly imbibing in, illegal substances or drinking themselves to death or whatever, it's not good. We don't want it. So we try and prevent it, but we're not going to necessarily outlaw and say, you just flat out can't because we are going to make you live longer.
So that's where you're talking. So the objective moral is maximization of human life. Right? That's because I've said that. So that is the objective, is we want as many people to live for as long as possible. That would be the ultimate moral good. Now, in order to achieve that, something that is immoral. If you are doing something immoral to obtain that end goal, then you've already defeated the purpose of that ultimate moral good. So taking away someone's liberty is an immoral act. You can never get to that maximization of human life if you are taking someone's liberty away in order to reach.
So that's a good question then. And I don't know if you covered that in your last stream, but are there any sort of these objective moralities that can overlap or intercede on another objective morality, or are there no overlaps or opposing points?
No, all of them must be consistent with each other. Like, if it is immoral to take people's things, you cannot take people's things in order to maximize human life. That's right. If it's immoral to imprison someone, you cannot imprison someone to maximize human life. The only objection, or the only caveat to that, is when that person is using their things to end the life of another, or is using their freedom to end the life of another. Because when you the first tenet, the first moral, objective moral, is always human life. So because without that, you can't have any of these other moral objectives. That is the fundamental one from which all the other ones are logically derived. That's why, like in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Perhaps this is where we would need some clarification to make things more objectionable. So if we've got these objective moralities and they kind of line up, they don't butt heads, they don't push on each other, or They basically are all.
Yeah, the only one who supersedes is life.
Morals at the same time without any sort of overlap or conflict or paradox. That being said, if someone is prone to violence, they've got assault charges and they're mentally unstable, so the government decides, hey, I don't think you're a viable person to have firearms. You have already proven yourself to be dangerous. You've already threatened to shoot other people. At this point, you are going to take your firearms. So that is in violation of their right to their property. That is someone else taking something which doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the guy, but is in benefit to others. That is where we actually would need to define and clarify how that function works in order for these objective morals to stay afloat or to be 100% achievable. Because I understand that concept, but those are easily manipulable. Because what do we define as mentally unstable? What do we define as aggressive? Me standing up and saying, look, I understand you're into this whole non-binary gender stuff, but I don't agree with it. All I see is men and women. And all of a sudden, I'm an aggressor and an unstable person because I don't agree with modern pseudoscience. And now I'm put on a watch list where my property can't be taken.
So that's why currently we have it in place, which, and this is a moral standard that I agree with, is that if someone has demonstrated a propensity for violence, domestic abuse, or has committed a felony, they get their firearms removed. They are no longer allowed to legally own a firearm.
So
now, they're trying to push so that way it's any kind of mental instability.
Violence.
Sorry, what?
You look at the Covington kids.
Yeah.
People took those MAGA hats as actual violence, which is why they said these kids need to be doxxed, harassed, or lives need to be ruined. They took it personally as them out there harassing this Native American with their MAGA hats was a sign of violence. Which
because they're stupid and they don't understand what violence is. They're completely changing the definition of the word violence. Violence is physical. Violence is physical attacks on someone.
So my question is, even with the society, where our societal constructs, because even though they say they're trying to eradicate societal constructs, what they're actually doing is creating new societal constructs that go in their viewpoint.
Yes.
It is not the point of being free or being rebellious. It is simply they want control
and this is a huge problem with the left, is they do not maintain consistent definitions. They switch the meaning. So they changed it from, like, words were never violence. Words are words. Actions are violence. You can't have violence without action.
Well, now they're
microaggressions
and microaggressions are in fact that aggression is violence. Therefore, you can retort with physical violence.
But that's not the case. That is a fraudulent argument that they've been misled to believe.
Even in a society like this, where we've got so much freedom, where people can twist the meanings of words and come up with their own definitions to try and persuade societal viewpoints, is there a way to state what exactly would comply and what would not comply with these objectives?
No, it's because if somebody's willing to believe nonsense,
property confiscation, both me and you would understand. If this guy is intending to possibly hurt somebody with those weapons, he's already proclaimed this, he's already demonstrated a physical violent capability and tendency. Then I understand. But the left can use that and say, Ben Shapiro has been spouting hate speech for the last decade. He's definitely a violent guy. Confiscate his weapons.
Okay, so the counter to that would be, we don't take away anybody's weapons for any reason, and then we let somebody who has a clear history of mental instability and of violent actions go on a murder spree that we could have prevented. That's,
how do we know we could have
it's a catch-22 situation where, okay, if we do the right thing because it's the right thing, then the wrong side is going to take that and manipulate it and twist it into something.
I'll give you two examples.
But that,
what was it? Parkland?
That doesn't.
Was it Parkland Springs? Is that what's the Florida?
Parkland.
There were signs of that kid having some mental instability. He should have not had been anywhere near firearms.
Yes.
In fact, there was many contacts to the school district, but the police and the FBI previous to that.
Yeah, and if you look at that district, it was specifically because they had a policy that if somebody was a minority, they were given
would ignore
more chances because in that particular county, Benson County or something with a B. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Yeah, so that Benton County, I think that county had a high representation of rather than just acknowledge that those minorities were committing more crimes. They were like, oh, this is a problem with the system being racist. So now instead of enforcing the law and not caring about the race of the person who's breaking it, they said, oh, well, let's see, this person broke the law, but there are X number of minorities, and we need to reduce the minorities in our system and keep them out of the prison system. So they ignored it. They were giving them way too many chances of breaking the law without stepping in and intervening.
And that point,
but that's an issue.
My point on that is there were signs that this kid was capable and very willing to do something.
And the law enforcement and the school systems both decided that because he was a specific minority, if he was white, he would have never gotten that. He would have been in juvenile detention or some kind of based on their own policies.
This is all beside the point.
No, that is entirely the point. He got a free pass specifically because he was not white.
Look at
that is the policies of that county.
Vegas shooting.
Yes. Okay, Vegas shooting, there was no way of preventing that.
That's my point.
I don't understand, because in one case
that things could be prevented, we should take action, but there is no way for us to completely prevent it. Some people just...
So then we should do nothing.
Or we still haven't figured out if that was some sort of undercover sting operation. There were rumors of him being in league with either the CIA or FBI, trying to do some sort of weapons cell, and
that's my personal opinion on that matter.
We don't know. Information is very sparse. It's a year later, and people have almost forgotten about it, even though that's the biggest mass shooting I can remember ever. Over 50 people. Everyone still remembers Parkland Springs. Very few people remember that other Springs place in Texas, where the guy got his own AR-15 and killed the shooter. Those stories die down. The big shooting was, over 50 people. That's nuts. And yet that was one where we had very little sign, if any, that something was going to happen. There was no indicator, at least from anybody who knew this guy, that something was unstable. So
I know.
So
then that was something we couldn't do anything about. Although with Parkland Springs, with the kid who shot up the school, there was something that we could have done as well, not we personally, but the people who were given those positions, those responsibilities, that could have done something to prevent that. And they chose to do everything to stop. They chose to let everything slide and took no responsibility the entire time.
My point is, there are some instances where we can kind of have indicators. And at that point, it would be, I would say, morally correct to intervene and say, look, you've shown signs that you are going to harm people. At that point, we're going to override your objective right, basically, to bear these arms, and we are going to seize your property, which normally would be morally wrong, but due to what you have presented and the evidence we have, we're going to seize it. But on counterpoint, the Vegas shooting, nobody had any clue. There was nothing to seize because nobody knew.
I don't get how that's a counterpoint.
Even if everybody was given and just allowed to have it, these shootings happen regardless.
So let's apply this to another situation. So more hypothetical. Okay, so you have, let's go back to our first scenario where a man is about to kill a woman and you kill that man, right? Okay, that's because you see the guy engaging in attack on a woman. Now, let's say some guy kills a woman in a back alley. Okay, you had no way of preventing that. You had no way of knowing he was about to do that. So how does that say, oh, well, that means we shouldn't try to prevent any murders? That doesn't make any sense. Those are two separate scenarios. The principle of the matter is that if you can stop an act, you do stop that act.
Yes.
If you can't stop an act, that doesn't matter. There's no moral bearing on something that you can't take an action against. So this is what it was talking about when Stefan Monolith talks about UPB. He separates UPB from things like obeying gravity because you don't have a choice in a matter. Now, with the guy who shot up Las Vegas, we had absolutely no choice in the matter because there was nothing we could have done to take action to stop it. When your choice is removed from the situation, morality has no bearing, because morality is specifically actions people choose.
Yes.
If choice is not there, you cannot make it a moral situation.
So
any more than you can make it moral that, oh, you fell out of a plane and you died. That's immoral of you. No, that's gravity. You have no choice.
And I'm not disagreeing with any points you've made. I'm on the same page as you. What I'm trying to open is the idea of the reason that we have so much discussion on gun legislation, and we need to get rid of assault rifles, and how there's a massive part of the population that says we need to get rid of automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons. Those are all dangerous, and they don't even comprehend what semi-automatic means.
Yes.
They don't understand that that's 99% of all weapons.
So you bring up situations and things that the left is doing that are not moral.
I understand.
That have no bearing on objective morality. So I'm seeing this a little bit as a non sequitur to the conversation about UPB.
A little bit more clearly. So on one hand, we've got a situation, the Parkland Springs shooting, where there's plenty of signs. Somebody should have done something. The police, FBI, local authorities, the school system, anybody should.
Which is a moral failings on the authorities there, which means you can't hold them responsible for it.
Correct. And then on the Vegas shooting, we have 0 signs. We've got nothing, right?
Yes. So there's no one to hold morally responsible.
Okay. So on the Parkland Springs.
Well, unless you believe that he was a CIA or FBI asset that was smuggling guns and selling.
Knowledge. We have 0 idea on his motives or what even happened there, how he got so many guns in a room. Nobody has a clue that we've been made aware of. So we're just going to go off here, right? On the one hand, we got plenty of signs. On the other hand, nothing. Besides plenty of signs, what do we determine is a symptom of potential gun violence? And what do we just determine as a symptom of they had a bad day and were agitated?
Well, with the kid in the Parkland shooting, he had several incidents involving a firearm where the police were called. So I don't know if it was shooting animals in the backyard or just shooting a firearm within city limits, like in a neighborhood. So they were called on his house several times in regard to the shooting a firearm. That's where you'd be like, okay, well, that's a clear distinction where someone should have been like, nope, you can't use this correctly. You don't get it.
I'm not in dispute with that kid. I think our governmental system completely failed 100%. I mean,
that's a clear-cut area where, like, okay, you're looking for clear-cut distinctions. Mishandling a firearm, having a history of doing that. Okay, that's pretty clear, pretty obvious.
It's under my skin. I had that bad streak months ago where I went on a rant, but it irks. The government just completely did not do their job, and they keep trying to pass the blame onto everybody else, other than saying.
And to the best of my knowledge, no one has been held accountable in that county or in
they
that
don't want to look racist.
Yeah,
it's just simply
the only person was that officer who didn't go in, and he got like administrative leave or something like that.
Yeah,
but from the last I heard about the story, he's still on the force.
We can't rely on you to do your job. You're gone.
Yeah, last I heard, he was either still on the force or he was getting retirement benefits. I don't know which of the.
You can't be a cop. You can't be in the military if you can't protect who you're supposed to and what you're assigned to. You're just not reliable. Go find some other line of work. Sorry, not for me. So that's beside the point. What I'm getting at is, at what point do we draw the line? So let's say you go to work.
There's a clear distinction. It's like, okay, if you've had the cops called on you for discharging a firearm and within city limits, okay, that's you can't use this properly. Take it away. And then
you're just having a bad day, right? You show up at work and you're getting terminated. Your department's cut. You just lost your job. You go home and then find out your woman's cheating on you. Worst day ever, right? You go to Walmart or you go to 7-Eleven and get yourself a Slurpee, and you're just so angry that you start throwing stuff around the store and yelling, and you don't know how to control yourself because your life has just crumbled right before you in one day.
Yeah.
Does that mean the government has the right to come and take your weapons and say you are now a threat? What if
based on that situation, no.
Down and say that was just a bad day. Let me pick myself back up. How do we determine when you are now a threat and your property deserves to be seized? That's my
based on that situation, no. You would still get to retain your firearms, and even under the the existing laws in the U.S., you would not get your firearm stripped from you, because that is not an incident of domestic violence, nor is it an incident of that would classify you as a felon. That would be a misdemeanor.
If you have declared that you would shoot somebody, you made a public statement of doing harm with weapons.
Yeah. Phew. Okay, that gets a little tricky, because at that point you have declared, you've made a call to action, or a valid, or a
let's say there's a black man.
What's the word? That is a threat. Like, but what's the word? There's another word. It's like a valid threat or a credible threat.
Okay.
At that point, since you said you would shoot somebody, that is a credible threat. In which case, if somebody gives you a firearm or allows you to have a firearm and you use that to kill someone, that's on the person who gave you the firearm.
Well, I'll give you another example. Yeah. And so again, I'm just tossing stuff out there to see what sticks, what doesn't. Are there any holes in this? Let's make this a solid point, right? Okay. So let's say there's a black man, and he says, I do have a gun, but if I see any KKK members or any neo-Nazis coming on my property trying to burn a cross, I'm going to shoot those guys. Is that a public declaration or threat?
Wait, you said you're going to shoot those guys? Yes. That would also qualify as a credible threat.
But I mean, is he in the wrong? Why would a KKKs or neo-Nazi be showing up on his property to do damage or burn a cross or whatever? They're obviously, you know, a racist group threatening his life, or not necessarily physically threatening, but, you know, being a direct opposition or imposition.
Okay, so they are on his
have a right to defect his property. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they. I guess don't they normally stick those in the front yards or something?
Yeah. So as soon as they come onto his property, that is a credible threat from them. In which case, they are the ones initiating the act of violence.
But is his statement beforehand, before any action is taken, would that be considered as him being violent, or that being a credible threat?
I can't pass
this could all be mistaken. All these words could be termed a certain way within public media, and then all of now you're extremely scrutinized. Now the government has to get on your back because the media and public perception is very negative in your life.
Okay, so if all they were doing is doing a protest or something like, because until they come onto your property, and then that means they're not respecting your private property. They can protest all they want. They can put on their hoods and they can go and they can chant their slogans. But the second they come onto your property or start damaging your property, it is shown that they have no respect for you or your rights. In which case, then you can legitimately fear for your life, in which case using a firearm or threatening to shoot them in response is a valid response, because you have no way of guaranteeing that they will respect your right to life, because they've already proven they don't respect your other rights. So why should you?
They don't respect.
It would be it would be irrational to assume, well, like, okay, yeah, they burned my property, they put a cross on there, they're surrounding my house, but there's no way that people who would violate these other things would violate my right to life. That doesn't follow logically. Which is why if somebody breaks into your house, and maybe to steal food or whatever, but you have no idea if they're going to be there to rape you and your wife and your kids or whatever, or if they're there to kill you, you have no way of knowing what their intention, because they've already demonstrated that they have no regard for your property, no regard for the regular rule of law. So how can you hold somebody who has a history of violating the rule of law or violating moral objectives? Someone who has shown disregard, you can't assume that they would here's where they're going to draw the line, obviously. No, they've shown that they don't have lines. They've shown that there is nothing that is off limits to them. So why would they suddenly draw a line? Like, okay, we'll do all of these other things, but killing people, who would do that? That would be a crazy monster. But you just burned down my house, and it doesn't logically follow. It's someone willing to, you can't expect them to follow any rules.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I completely agree.
Yeah, if somebody's willing to cheat at a game of cards, you can't, but if they were in a real tournament or something, they would do it legitimately. Like, no, if they're willing to cheat on those small things, they could cheat on the big things. What's stopping them? they've already shown that they have no boundaries. It's the same.
Okay. So kind of my final point on this, and again, I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate, not because I necessarily disagree with anything you said. In fact, I'm in full agreement.
Okay, yeah, and so we're in realms that are not covered in the book, and this is everything that so far has been not.
It's kind of testing the theory on what we would say this is an objective moral.
Yes.
You should not end life unless someone or your own life is threatened.
Yes.
If it is necessary to protect your life or someone else's, is the only time, because they have violated your right to exist and they have already broken the moral objective of trying to preserve life.
Yeah.
Therefore, you do have the opportunity to protect yourself and your loved ones or those around you, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that I understand. And then I get it. The third point would be those can still be manipulated. And while it may not necessarily be objective, these are people with subjective views. It seems the reason that these objective, and I'll put those in quotes because there are people who wouldn't actually believe that there are objective moralities, that the reason that this is even under review or rebutted, the idea that there could be objective morals, is because people choose to view them subjectively. And even if they were objective morals, they would not necessarily abide by those objective morals.
Yes.
This would fall along the same lines of, say, abortion.
Okay. So this is something
to think of human life at different stages as having less or more value.
Well,
because of that, they could twist these objective morals to their subjective view.
So that's okay. So before you get into the subject of abortion, so this is something that I closed my stream last week talking about, because this is something that people for some reason don't get when it comes to objective morality. So I'm going to reiterate the point here. So objective morality, and the way Stefan defines it as UPB, is entirely optional. So there is no way to force somebody to adhere to objective morality. But similarly, there is no requirement to it. Right? Is there some kind of law where, oh, you didn't follow the scientific method, go to jail or get shot? If you don't follow the scientific method, you can choose not to follow that. Yeah, however, the scientific method is the objective standard.
He's basically stating what is. There are objective morals. These do exist.
Yes.
They are real. There are objective morals that surround humanity as a species. This is the way we operate. This is just what is. Now, whether or not you believe it or abide by it, that's your personal choice.
Yes, that is your personal choice. But a lot of people, when they're talking about objective morality, they look at people's personal choices, and people who choose to disregard objective morality and act as they chose to disregard it, therefore objective morality must not exist. And there's people out there who make claims that crystals will save your soul or will protect you from harm. Yeah. And they say, because it's the magical healing powers of crystals. And I'm like, those, according to people who say that, this person acted in a immoral way, therefore objective morals don't exist. I'm like, those people acted in a way that was non-scientific. Does that mean the scientific method doesn't exist? It's irrational and illogical.
I have a good, I guess not equation, but just another expression or way of looking at it. So atheists say there is no God. There's no scientific proof of God. And yet they neglect to understand that science cannot disprove God.
Yes.
Firstly, Christians say most definitely there is a God, and a lot of them say there's no such thing as evolution. Scientifically, we actually can't disprove evolution either. No. So those who adamantly stick to this is all created within 6 or 7 days, exactly like the Bible says 100%, we can't question it. They are in the same boat as atheists. They have chosen not to believe that what they see in front of them, what they see in the physical world, what they can measure and objectively test is accurate, and that anything else is merely speculation or a belief system.
Well, yeah, if you actually listen to a lot of what the creation scientists say, they say, yeah, we can't prove this, although this is based on what we do know, this seems like a better explanation of how everything got to be where it is.
Well, I mean,
But
now
they can't prove anything.
Up, you know, we were in our single-digit years and stuff. We were told, yeah, it's 7 days, word for word. The Bible is 100% this way. And as I got older, there's a lot of well, it might not have actually been 7 like Earth days, seeing as the Earth didn't exist in the first few. How would that be 24 hours? That doesn't make sense. There's a lot of stuff they started to pick apart, and it doesn't make sense. So there's a very real possibility it wasn't 7 24-hour periods. In fact, more than likely, that's not what actually happened. Whatever 7 days was, it's not our typical days because those days didn't exist at the start.
Yeah.
So how can it be a measurement?
And even in the original Hebrew, the word days there has multiple meanings, and it's not days as in 24-hour periods. It is periods of time. The actual word, forget
what I'm saying. When we grew up,
the word used there is not. So it was translated today. It was translated into English today, although in the original Hebrew meaning it means period of time. So it doesn't mean 24-hour cycle.
What I'm saying is that's what we were taught growing up, is that it was a actual
and we were taught incorrectly.
1 week.
Yeah, we were taught incorrectly, and according to the original writings, the 1 week viewpoint doesn't match the original transcript.
So my point here is what you can prove, what is scientific, and what is in front of you, and what seems to be evident. Take that and say, okay, I understand that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what you cannot prove, don't reject it. Simply state, I don't understand it. I might not agree with it, but I can't say it doesn't exist.
Well, there are things about evolution that we can disprove as far as it being how life got to where it is. Namely, so this point of abiogenesis.
Right now about like crystals turning into biological cells, and they don't even know how the Big Bang turned into life.
Yeah.
About crystals, and some of those crystals immersed with water and oxygen in the atmosphere started to divide into living cells, which makes sense.
The other thing, so this is I think I've talked about this before on my
what we can physically test right now and observe and say that meets 0 observations what we got right now.
However, so the very first life form would have had to have 3 properties. Would have had to have the ability to turn inorganic matter to organic matter, the ability to reproduce, and the ability to acquire inorganic matter, as in take actions to get inorganic matter in order to make it a part of its body. If it lacks any of those 3,
take inorganic matter. Like all life requires organic matter.
Yeah. Well,
insects, viruses, bugs, fungus, it all thrives off organic matter. There's nothing that says
no, inorganic matter.
Yeah,
because you're talking like look at the amoebas take inorganic matter and make it and absorb it, to break it down and turn it into part of their bodies. That's inorganic matter, not organic matter.
Oh, okay. I guess amoebas.
Yeah, well, so I'm talking about the very first life form would have had to have the ability to reproduce, the ability to take inorganic matter and make it a part of its body, and also the ability to pursue inorganic matter. If it's in a small area and it's consumed all of the organic matter around it and it cannot it's just consumed all the inorganic matter around it and it doesn't have enough resources and it can't move or it can't know where to go to get more inorganic matter, it dies and life as we know it ends. So it needs to have the ability to pursue inorganic matter to make it part of itself and then split into 2 separate organisms based off of that. Now, the complexity of the very first life form being a single-celled amoeba like that has those 3 properties is statistically impossible based on proteins, which they're talking about. So proteins are the building blocks of DNA and RNA. What's the other thing? Oh, sorry. No, amino acids. Amino acids come together to form protein.
Yes.
And then proteins come together to form RNA, and then RNA. I think RNA comes together to form DNA is the most complex structure, but all of the fundamental building blocks are made from
DNA are somewhat separate. Like DNA is the blueprint and RNA is the activator.
But DNA can reproduce. So DNA can reproduce RNA. RNA can reproduce other RNA and other. So DNA can reproduce DNA, RNA, and protein. Oh, sorry, just DNA and RNA. RNA can reproduce RNA and proteins. Proteins is made of amino acids, and proteins build RNA and DNA.
Yeah,
that's the structure. But amino acids is all they've ever been able to produce as far as like coming from inorganic matter. Now, the number of combinations of amino acids to create proteins, there are millions of different combinations, but there are only something like in the range of 26 proteins that are actually found in every living organism. So, and then the number of proteins that actually, the number of combinations of proteins is some astronomical number. As far as the number of different combinations is more atoms than are in the universe. And yet you would have to have a specific subset of that in order to create the first RNA. But RNA by itself is not enough to create life. So it's like the mathematical behind inorganic matter becoming organic matter without some kind of intelligence is just astronomically insane. It's insane to even consider that being a probability of
this. I understand. However, it cannot be 100% disproven.
No,
it is just 99.99999% unlikely.
Yeah, because you would have to have that as a foundation before evolution can ever even be considered.
So now, what I'm saying, and this relates back to the initial
foundation
of objective morality, is that even for things, viewpoints such as is there an intelligent design or are atheists correct and there's nothing or just life floating out in space that just randomly popped up, science cannot prove or disprove really either side.
Either one. Yeah.
It comes down to a belief
because
system.
it's not the realm of science. Yeah.
And this comes down to moral objectivity, is that what Stefan Monalou is trying to do is objectively prove that these do exist, but it is a belief system on whether or not you abide by it.
Yeah, in the same way.
Scientifically, logically, we can say that due to everything we've observed from humankind and the way we interact and all tribes, all people everywhere, there are certain consistencies. So objectively, there are certain morals, and I do agree with that.
So here's the other side: is those atheists, those atheists, they swear by the scientific method, right?
Yeah, and it's inaccurate because sure, you can't prove God, but you also cannot.
No. God, what I'm saying is they follow the objective standard of the scientific method. Somebody brings them something. Hey, okay, let me clarify this point.
A small percentage actually follow logical progression and therefore would maintain their objectivity throughout this logical progression. Most, it's still a belief, and they just want to say, no, there's no. They actually,
and that's not the point that I'm making. That's completely irrelevant. So what I'm saying is they follow the scientific method, right? If somebody presents them something and they say, hey, this is science, and then they ask, okay, how did you arrive by that? And it's like, oh yeah, I rolled some dice and got this answer. So this is the scientific aim. They would like, no, that's not following the scientific method. That's not science. And they completely dismiss that.
I'm telling you, that's purportedly. That's why we have pseudoscience, such as just gender transmorphism stuff that's around now. That's not science.
If somebody presents something to you as science, like if somebody says the gods fart and that creates thunder, and this is a scientific fact,
and say, how did you arrive at that scientific conclusion?
Okay, how do you prove whether it was scientific or not? Well, do you see if they actually followed the scientific method to arrive at that conclusion? You verify their test results, see if you can repeat it. That's part of an objective system in order to determine this. But people don't follow it, like you said. So with the people who are in the whole, gender has no basis in biology. Well, they're ignoring the scientific method. They're separating themselves from objective facts in order to fulfill their ideology.
Yes.
But how do you disprove something like that? Well, you use the scientific method to arrive at scientific facts that are objective and verifiable. And this is Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings. Well, how do those facts arrive? Well, the feelings ideologies and belief systems, the facts are derived from objective standards like the scientific method.
Yes.
So whether somebody adheres to an objective standard or not is irrelevant to whether that objective standard exists. That's
correct. Well, my overall point is you are correct on all of that. I'm not denying any of that.
Yeah.
I'm not rejecting any of that. You're correct, and I think along the same lines as you. I'm just trying to play.
Yeah,
again, devil's advocate. Most of the population doesn't analyze as deep as you or I do, or as deep as Stefan Monalu or Ben Shapiro. They do not jump into details or follow logical progression like that, because it's time consuming. You do have to kind of have an understanding of general logical progressions and what makes sense and what does connect. Does point A connect to point B or no? And I would argue that there's a large percentage of the population that either cannot comprehend that level of logical progression or comprehension, or two, don't care and will not ever invest themselves into that type of investigation.
Okay, so similarly,
in that we have objective morals, and those do stand, regardless if you believe them or not. They are objective,
so
simply based off of the way humankind exists. But to try and prove that to people who do not necessarily abide by that understanding, if they are incapable of understanding logical progression, then they may in fact be incapable of understanding the full scope of what it means to be objectively moral.
Okay, so then this would not be for them. Everything, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, so the issue is not getting to the stupid people who are going to do whatever they want no matter what. The issue is getting to the people who are logical. So the scientific method didn't exist. Trying to think of when exactly did that come into existence? It's like it's less than 1,000 years old.
Yeah, I was thinking like 15 or 1600s, right?
No,
it's like Newton.
I think it's a little. I think it's a little older than that, but not by much. It's after the year 1000. So I think you could double check that. I think I looked that up last time. It's like around the 1200 or something like that.
17th century.
Oh, 17th century?
That's when our modern understanding of scientific method. So yeah, about.
Are you sure? I think I looked that up. Okay, man, now I gotta look this up. Okay. And it says, so scientific method coined?
Well, at least by the 17th century. Our modern scientific method is.
No, okay, that's, Dark Ages. 1214 is the earliest mention of the scientific method.
Yeah, I don't think they had it fully defined as this is the scientific method until that time period, and then from then going on, that's what they compared all future science to compare to understand is this actual science or speculation.
Yeah. So when it was first introduced, who started picking up? Was it the alchemists? Was it the witches? Was it the spiritualists? No, it was the scientific community. There's people who were like, oh, this is objectively true. Let's start using it. It started off small, and over time, more people started adopting it. Now, the U.S. and a lot of Western civilizations, and even, well, I guess Japan and China are also following the scientific method, but there's still cultures out there who completely disregard the scientific method, completely disregard all scientific advancement and the objective reality. There are crazy people out there. But the scientific method started off small, and because it was true and it was a way of finding the objective truth, it caught on, and now it has become the norm.
I mean, I think people are habitual, and this equates to a somewhat superstition or superstitional type belief. Same way people will go to a casino and say, hey, I need to sit in this chair. This is my lucky chair. There's zero science. Okay. That makes no sense.
But that doesn't matter, because the original adopters were people who were smart enough to understand it. Meanwhile, everybody else was out worshiping spirits and trying to cure the Black Plague by putting people together in the same area.
Yeah.
By spreading the disease, they were trying to cure it. There's
people poisoning themselves to try and kill some other illness.
Yeah, or even more recently, people were trying to drain the bad blood.
Yeah, bloodletting.
Yeah, so okay, people will do stupid things, but those people who would do the stupid and habitual things were not the people that the scientific method originally appealed to. The scientific method appealed to people who are smart enough to understand it and were smart, like, oh, finally I have a standardized way of doing things that I can share with other people who also subscribe to that standardized way of doing things. We can share information, and it grew our technological understanding rapidly from that point on. Because if you look at the technological advancements we've had in the last 1,000 years, like we've done more in a single decade than we had in the entire 6,000 to 7,000 years of recorded history prior to the, the Dark Ages. Like the amount of technological advancements far outreaches anything we had as far as what was previously recorded. It's thanks to objective standards like the scientific method, because without that, we would have never had things like the agricultural revolution. We would have never had we'd never have modern medicine, which again is another thing that led to. Sorry, what?
That's modern computer sciences.
Yeah, those things wouldn't exist at all without that objective standard to follow. Now, but there's still people in art that has become the norm for verifying facts when it comes to scientific reality and physical reality. The scientific method has become the norm. It wasn't the norm, and for a while there, it was fighting against what was basically nonsense. But okay, that's going to happen. So when it comes to an objective standard for proving morality, it's not going to appeal to the people who want to believe in nonsense. It's not going to appeal to the people who are out there shouting in the streets that there are 67 genders or an infinite number of genders, or that there are cloud people, or that this person identifies as being a 7-year-old girl, so they are a 7-year-old girl, and who are you to say otherwise? Okay, those people cannot be reasoned with using even the scientific method. How are you going to try to convince them with logic and reasoning to accept some kind of objective moral standard? It's a waste of time. However, an objective moral standard would appeal to people who are rational, who understand logic and reasoning, and have been looking for something that, like, oh, hey, this is exactly the type of system I've been looking for, and I tried finding it with Sam Harris, and Sam Harris left me wanting because his stuff was completely inconsistent and nonsensical for the most part when it comes to the establishment of a secular morality.
Yeah, I
was trying to find it with Dawkins, and Dawkins is really
religion. He has a severe bias. It's
just
to the point where he won't even listen.
Oh, there is an amazing quote from C.S. Lewis.
What do you mean? At this point, we're in part 3 of your stream about at least trying to get some sort of objective standard or objective proof that there are certain moral objective standards within human society, regardless of what society it is, where you come from. There are certain moral standards. Do you think that has been conveyed, or you've presented Stefan Monalou's idea clear enough to convey that point? Were there any other points you wanted to bring up about that?
I didn't get through most of it, but so there is some things on here that I didn't get to. So because scientific theory must be the first test of a scientific theory is universality. So that would be the first test of a moral theory is, can it be applied universally? Like it. So the scientific counterpoint is atoms contain protons and neutrons and electrons. That's true of all atoms, not just some of them, or atoms in one particular location, or a subset of atoms. It's every single atom that has been examined. Someone looks at an atom under a microscope and observes something that isn't an atom with protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay, then we have to throw out that theory. But for the most part, all atoms have those properties. Shouldn't say like everyone that we've ever found has those properties. So that is a valid scientific explanation of the makeup of an atom. So similarly, a moral theory can't apply to just some people, or a certain set of people, or a set of people at a specific time or place. It's across the board. That's if it's objective moral, it's got to apply to every single human, no exceptions. So here's an issue that I had with the book, or with the UPB in general, because he starts saying, so he says part 2 that an objective moral philosophy must have is it must maintain consistency. Now he says a moral theory must be logically consistent and predictable, but it doesn't have to follow the same standards of consistency that we apply to science. And I'm like, that's where I have an issue with what he said in the book. I don't think that caveat is necessary. Okay, so here's an example. So rape cannot be both moral and immoral simultaneously. And I'm like, well, then why does this objective morality not have to follow the same standard of consistency? It sounds like he kind of got a little sidetracked with the meaning of consistency. For objective morality, consistency just means an action can't be both moral and immoral at the same time. That would be the standard of consistency.
What moral needs to be consistently moral, and at no point can it ever be considered immoral. Otherwise, it's not a moral act.
Yeah. So I agree that it must be logical, consistent, predictable. I'm not sure why he says it doesn't have to follow the same standard of consistency.
Moral and immoral at the same time ever. Obviously, it cannot. But what an odd example.
What? No, it's to prove that
moral ever.
No, it wouldn't be moral, and that's why it's very. So this is why in conversations where I've had with people talking about objective morality versus subjective morality, for some reason, murder they don't quite make this distinction. It's like, okay, yeah, because they'll talk about examples like, well, that's not murder, that is killing, but not murder. Murder has a specific definition, and you're trying to change that. Theft the same way. People are like, oh, but what if you're stealing to save yourself from starving to death?
That's still
rape is one of those things where it's clear cut. It's the out of all of the things that are morally reprehensible.
Murder is the most. Killing is just.
Well,
killing.
I've had people argue that I've had people argue with me that stealing and killing could be morally acceptable under specific situations. There's no situation in which rape could be moral.
They're thinking stealing like Robin Hood, which actually he was just stealing people's money back because it was stolen in the first place.
Because it was stolen in the first place, yeah.
It didn't belong to Prince John.
Yeah. So rape is the easiest one to talk about when determining a moral absolute. There is no conceivable situation where rape would be a moral thing to do. It
would almost seem like morals are.
So I say, yeah, that caveat about it being.
Well, no, that's not.
Sorry, what? Well, he said, yeah, because he says that it doesn't need the same standard of consistency as science. I'm like, no, it kind of does. I'm not sure why he put that caveat in there.
I mean, there could be some caveats, right? So let's say stealing is bad, right? It's just morally wrong.
Yeah.
However, you're a parent. You've got a teenage kid who likes to take his money and go out and buy dope or whatever. They smoke weed. As a parent, you're concerned. You don't want them spending their money on it, so you take their money out of their drawer. You stash it somewhere else because you're tired of your kid using their money as drug money. Yeah. Are you stealing it, or are you doing your job as a parent? And is it morally wrong for you to do that? Now, I can't go to my neighbor's house and steal their money if they're doing drugs and say, I'm just trying to protect you. That would be outright theft. I have no obligation to do so. That's not my money, and I have no parental rights or any rights to invade their home and take their property. But for your own child who does live with you, you do have that right. And at that point, is it stealing, or are you just trying to protect your child? So when they come home, they look for their money. Hey, what happened? Now you can sit down and have a discussion and say, I know what you're using this money for. You need to stop it. You're trying to do your job as a parent. Are you morally wrong for having taken that money? Is that where you find inconsistencies? Is when you don't do it out of malicious intent. You do it out of trying to benefit those who were affected because you feel that they are doing something morally incorrect.
Now, when it is your kid, that is different because, so like you were saying, you can't go out and steal from your neighbor. Also, you couldn't go out and steal from somebody else who is an adult who was like, so if you are an adult and your child is an adult, I guess you're adult, that's kind of given. If your child is an adult and is living off by themselves and is going out and buying working a job and using that money to buy drugs, you can't go into their house and steal their drug money or their drugs.
Correct.
No matter how much you may want to. If they are on their own and independent, they are no longer your sole responsibility. You may feel the obligation to stop them, but you have no moral authority to stop them. If they are living in your house and they are under they are your responsibility, then you do have the moral authority to go in and take their stuff if they're going to use it for nefarious purposes.
Well, and I would agree. I have no disagreement with that. That's why I brought it up. But if we go on the moral authority that you shouldn't take other people's property or belongings, what does the parent taking the child's belongings is that?
If it's inside your house, everything in there is your property, and you are lending it to your kids out of your own. But if they choose to abuse it, then you take it back. So
I mean, that depends. What if they went out, mowed some lawns, got a summer job? It was their money; they earned it, but they still your home.
Let's go.
And it's not. And if I'm going to take the money, I'm not spending it on myself. I'm hiding it so they don't use it for something bad. I'm wondering if that's something he was considering as far as it doesn't have to be 100% consistent, because there could be times when you not want to, but it is the better option than not doing something.
So I guess that might be why he made that caveat for not being completely because he did say because humans have factors that physical objects do not. So physical objects will maintain the same properties.
Yeah.
So humans have genetics, their environments, and free will that influence what happens. An atom does not have. An atom is an atom regardless of its environment. An atom is an atom. It doesn't have genetics. An atom does not have free will. It is bound by the laws of physics. So humans have those three things that will change their situation and affect their choices. Like you may because of your genetics, you can't choose to be an all-star basketball player. Like, okay, I was genetically born with missing a leg. Can I choose to be a two-legged person? No. It does. Well, can I choose to be an all-star athlete? I'm like, well, that's not on the table for you. So that would affect some of your decisions in your life.
It's just one of the areas where I find that kind of almost a gray area, or physical assault, right? If I was to go to, say, a 7-Eleven and I see a guy mouthing off to a cashier just because he says, hey, go back to India or go back to Mexico or go back to wherever, some kind of, he's making fun of a racist comment at a cashier, I can't say, hey, dude, that's not right. Bend him over my knee and spank his rear and say, straighten up. Now, if my 6-year-old was mouthing off to a teacher, I can do that, and I have that option. Take them home and say, you do not talk to authority like that. That's your teacher. You come talk to me if you have a problem.
Yeah.
And I do have the right to bend them over and spank them and say, this is your punishment.
And so
the other nowadays is questionable, but when we were growing up, it was necessary. It was proper punishment for doing something incorrect.
Yeah. So I don't remember if Stefan gets to that in the UPB book, although I do know he talks about peaceful parenting, and I don't remember his exact argument when it comes to children themselves. But I do know Murray Rothbard talked about children being the property of their parents
until they are able to sustain them.
Yes, because they are the responsibility of the parent, right? So
that would almost make sense. Legally, the wife is still the responsibility of the husband, even after separation, until she gets remarried. So that still applies to adults in our legal system. So I can see that.
If you are responsible for someone, they are kind of your property. In which case, if your child goes out and vandalizes somebody else's property, you as a parent can be held accountable for that vandalism. Not the child themselves, but you, because you are the owner of that child until that child is independent.
Okay, that would make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that basically that falls in line, because what you would consider moral, if your offspring are doing something immoral, but you are at the point where you still hold responsibility.
Yeah.
You are trying to correct an immoral action of your household. So.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the other thing is a valid moral theory must pass empirical observations. And this is a part where a lot of people fail when they're talking about subjective and objective morality. Because there's a lot of things that are submitted as moral, as valid moral claims, even if they fit reality. They don't fit the past. They don't understand. So, okay. So let me get the exact quote. If a moral theory fails to explain the past, understand the present, and predict the future, it must be rejected as invalid. So when people say, oh, it's immoral to eat animals, I'm like, well, okay. So just because it doesn't explain the past doesn't mean it may not be moral, but it doesn't understand the present and it doesn't predict the future as far as moral progress. You're like, well, that can't be a valid moral theory because, well, it's never happened in the past, and also we can't do that in the present or in the future. So why would you claim that as a valid moral thing? It's like, oh, it's immoral to eat animals. I'm like, it's never been immoral in the past.
Slavery. It was acceptable in the past, but now it's considered an abhorrent blight on society, and definitely not acceptable in the future.
But the case of the abolitionists, they were making cases in the present, and they were predicting a future as far as if this was immoral, this would lead to things in the future, and which is exactly why slavery was abolished. And we were like, okay, everything that they said would be the case and should be the case. They were right on what they were saying. So I guess by that same mentality, if we ever get to a future where nobody eats meat, then we'll be like, oh, how were we so dumb in the past?
Okay, so I think I might have a way of clarifying. Basically, a moral objective would have to be universal. Slavery,
but it's already been universal right now. But it also,
no, I mean, slavery has never been universally accepted.
Okay, yeah.
Those enslaved do not want to be enslaved.
Yes. Yeah.
But as far as eating animals, now this is from a purely human perspective, because slavery affects humans, right? It's one human who has dominance over another human's life when they shouldn't. So this is all strictly the human race. When it comes to eating animals, now we get into humans and animals. And all throughout history, it has been acceptable to eat animals. So even if there are isolated tribes or small pockets, people here and there that were vegetarian, which I don't think we're really going to find much through history except for modern day, and that's only due to modern day agriculture and transportation that has made vegetarianism or veganism possibility.
Yeah.
So slavery has never been deemed as universally acceptable. It's just it was understood in a lot of societies and tolerated, but universally never. It was never universally, yeah, slavery's good. There's always been people objective to it.
Yeah, either the slaves themselves or societies that outright ban the practice or refuse to participate in it. Yeah.
Animals. And since that has never been a point, then therefore it's not a moral objective.
Yeah.
Or objectively moral.
Okay. So, okay. So last thing, oh man, I can't believe it's already 9:50. I do have stuff that I just got a pop-up message, so I've got to get to. So let's see if I can get this last of this knockout in the next 10 minutes or so. So if a moral theory proposes people should not murder, it must be applicable to all people. So if certain people are exempt from this moral claim, they must be proven to not be people or accept that their proposed moral theory is false. So So if the moral theory is false, then it stands to reason that the reverse should be true. So if a moral theory proposes that people should not murder, that creates a logical contradiction. If there is an so if moral theory proposes that people should not murder, that creates logical contradiction. Wait. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. So because if a moral theory proposes that people should not murder, but that theory is false, then it creates a logical contradiction, because that would mean that you'd have to murder people to be moral. So if there's an action that should be taken, then that action is moral, and not taking that action is immoral. Thus, those murdering people. So this is where he gets into breaking down arguments, and he's basically putting them into two separate categories, right?
That statement doesn't make sense.
Right.
I'm sorry.
So so
because it doesn't
make
it objectively moral doesn't necessarily mean it's in that moral scope. Period. So let's say you can't.
I'll get to that.
Wrong to murder people. Yeah. What if it's not just it's not a moral issue? Period. Therefore,
okay, so, I'm getting to that. So, but as far as it's concerned for the UPB, if a claim is that murder is immoral is made, then there are two possibilities. Murder is either moral or it's immoral. So if murder is moral,
there are actions that are not either.
I understand.
It's not moral or immoral. Eating ice cream is not either.
Okay, which means it doesn't. Okay, so I guess we want to jump down to that point. So I had my concern with that as well.
I mean, interrupt you because it makes sense that it's one or the other, because there's the option of it has nothing to do with morality.
So so Stefan is only giving two possibilities, right? It's either moral or it's immoral, with one being absurd and contradictory, while the other leads to a conclusion that killing in the name of one country is still an immoral act, right? So I've heard one rebuttal so far. I haven't heard one rebuttal so far bring up the possibility that murder could be amoral, which is the situation you're bringing up. Yes. Maybe murder has no bearing on morality whatsoever. So while both the idea of murder being moral and amoral sounds ludicrous, there's a possibility that murder could be an area where morality is subjective. So after thinking about this for a bit, that would be something. Okay, hang on a second. I did not finish that paragraph. Okay, no, yes, I did. Okay, so because that was one of my initial concerns. I was like, oh, but you're overlooking the possibility of it being amoral, right? But if something is amoral, it doesn't have any concern with a system whose sole purpose is defining moral claims.
Correct. Then it becomes subjective and has nothing to do with morality. It's just what it is.
So if somebody makes a moral claim that murder is immoral, and you're like, no, murder is amoral, I'm like, well, then why are you making a moral claim whether at all? It seems entirely preposterous. So so that would be like suggesting that a scientific theory could be true, false, or non-scientific at all. And you're like, wait a minute, you're telling me the gravity could be true, it could be false, or it could be not scientific at all.
Or I could tell you purple is the best color. Is that scientific or not?
But that's not a scientific claim.
Why?
Okay, so a scientific claim is that
try and prove whether or not purple is the best color.
You can't do that using the scientific method.
Why?
How would you do that?
I don't know. I'm just asking why.
No. How prove to me that purple is the best color using the scientific method?
You to prove it.
But I can't prove it. It's not scientific.
Therefore,
it's not a scientific claim.
It doesn't fall into true or false. To me, it's the best.
Yeah, I mean, really, it doesn't fall into true or false, but it also is not scientific at all.
But to me, the best color is purple is a true statement. To me, it is true.
But you you can't use the scientific method to prove or disprove that, or to prove that is not scientific.
It falls outside the scientific method, and it's not a true or false. Scientific method can only prove what is true or what is not true.
Yes.
Not
That's
what
exactly the
cannot
point.
be proven. That's the concept of God. It cannot prove yay or nay. Therefore, God is not scientific.
So in the same way, the UPB can only prove what moral claims are true and what moral claims are false. It can't prove that something is amoral.
Prove correct, but whether or not something is or is not, if it falls outside the scope, it is now outside the scope.
Yeah.
So just because murder someone would say, I don't think that's objectively immoral, or let's say murder, that's an immoral act. Morally,
but you could, but based on the criteria,
it's actually not either or.
Okay.
It's not true or false.
Okay,
Then it actually just falls out of that entire scope.
Okay, so when you make a hypothesis using the scientific method, and then you verify that hypothesis, whether you don't verify whether that hypothesis is scientific at all, you verify whether that hypothesis is correct or incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
So if
the
it's
hypothesis is the color purple is the best.
Okay, and you cannot prove that is true. So scientifically, that statement is false. And if you cannot verify that a moral claim is true,
no.
Then morality, you would have to. Morality would be that moral claim would be incorrect or false.
What you were
stating, it's not a valid moral claim.
What you were stating in Stefan Monolo's papers is whether something is moral or immoral. So if you state that this is supposed to be a universal morality, and then it's found it's not, then therefore it must be immoral. That's where I'm saying that's a problem. Doesn't necessarily mean it's immoral. It could just be in between. It's not moral or immoral. It is amoral, and it's pointless. It doesn't matter. Do it if you want. Don't do it. Who cares? Still there? I think the video feed froze.
What? He shot? Oh my god. Full mixtape? Yeah, I can probably give him.
Hello?
No.
Sorry, I don't know if that's my internet connection or your.
In the same way, if a moral claim, the way it is made currently, comes back with a false, and then you reverse it, and you also come back with a false, well, then that's not a moral claim at all. That's how this particular way of doing things works. If both sides return in a false conclusion, it's not a moral claim at all.
Okay, fine. I can get that. That's kind of what I was stating. Is just
it
doesn't necessarily have to be true or false. It could just not fit in either. Therefore, it's not a moral issue.
Yeah. So taking murder is one of the easier ones because it can be proven. So if murder were moral, that means you would have to constantly be murdering. The second you stop murdering, you become immoral, which you're bound by. You have to sleep, you have to eat. But you can't do those things because you got to be murdering all the time. It also means that everybody who's being murdered currently can't possibly be moral. So it's impossible for all humans to be moral at the same time if murder is the standard by which someone must be moral. It's a self-defeating proposition. However, so that can't possibly be a moral claim that murder is a moral act. Now, if you switch it the other way, you're like, okay, well, that couldn't possibly be true. Let's reverse it. Okay, murder is immoral. Okay, well, that's something that all humans could do. It's something that could be applied to every single human. It's something that is predictive of the past because murder has been pretty much universally banned by almost every society. But what that leads us to is a conclusion that may not be something a lot of people enjoy, but it's the conclusion that murdering by putting on a uniform and going to war for your country would also be an immoral act.
Well, no, I could barely make it.
Right? So it's something that could be universally applied. It's not self-contradictory. And also it has a history of predicting the past, and it explains our present, but it also would have future predictive capabilities. Okay, so if this is true, that murder is immoral, we got to start applying this to our military.
So if you take an event such as 9/11, right? And we had good intel that the terrorist groups or Taliban was in Afghanistan. Should we have sent military to Afghanistan in retribution for 9/11 and also to prevent future terrorist attacks?
But they didn't come out of Afghanistan. They were from Saudi Arabia.
Then why did they send all those troops to Afghanistan and say that's where the terrorist attacks came from? Okay, that's a bad example.
Yeah, bad example. It's misinformation.
We are attacked by terrorists. We know what group did it and where they live. Do we therefore deploy troops over there to reprimand and detain or, I guess, conquer that terrorist cell so they can no longer perform future terrorist activities? Is that an immoral act? Or is it moral, or is it just morally ambiguous because we don't really know? It's one people trying to protect themselves and another people that feel they have the right to wipe out the others due to religious beliefs. I don't know. Overall, I think murder is just bad. You shouldn't.
Yeah.
I think that could be considered objectively moral, but I think people do have the capability to objectively state, nope, I'm not going to abide by that in this circumstance, or yes, I will agree and follow along with that morality. So if overall you state it's subjectively immoral, then it means people are choosing to do an immoral action, but not necessarily for a bad purpose.
Well, so this is the thing that I was talking about. So this has been one of those conclusions that I had while I was actively serving in the military. So, because for me, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought, okay, I'm doing what is, an honorable thing for my country. I'm putting on a uniform. I'm serving people. And yeah, we're killing the bad guys so that way they don't kill us. But the more and more I thought about it, so I understand the idea. Okay, we were attacked. Now, those attackers weren't operating on their own. They had funding. They had people planning the attack. They had people encouraging. They had puppet masters.
Yeah.
Okay, so it makes sense that if the puppet masters were willing to do that once, they would possibly launch a similar attack or another attack. If that's the case, then we need to stop those puppet masters. Problem is, we still haven't stopped those puppet masters. We still didn't get to the people who are actually responsible, and nothing we did as far as our invasion or our ongoing war in Afghanistan or in Iraq or now in Iran. And we've also got troops in Syria. None of that has done anything to address the people who were responsible for that attack.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion, because then we get into religious aspects of, is it because of the Islamic religion, or is that just a cover?
Yeah.
There's actually people funded by
nothing we were doing
makes them money, or is it all over oil, or just territory, or petrodollar? It's a mess.
So it's the equivalent. It's the equivalent of, okay, somebody raped someone, and the rapist is dead, but somebody, well, okay, maybe that's not a good example. Someone hired somebody to attack you or whatever, steal stuff from you. Okay, but the thief is dead, but who hired the thief, right? Okay, well, now you're just going to go around setting everybody's house in your neighborhood on fire because somebody, one of them is the mastermind. That's what war is the equivalent of. You're like, okay,
there's two tribes, right? One's a peaceful tribe and one's a warring tribe. The warring tribe continuously attacks the peaceful tribe. At any point, would it be considered immoral for the peaceful tribe to finally stand up and say, we're going to fight back? We're tired of being harassed and killed. And so they then go on the offensive and go out, seek out the warring tribe, and try and decimate them because they're tired of the constant attacks. is that an immoral action?
It is an immoral action because you're not
You will
discriminating.
always be on the constant defensive if there are those.
You're not discriminating on who is the ones actually, because it's not everybody in that village. It's not the women and children that are killing your stuff. It's to hold an entire group of people responsible, which is what we continually do in the act of war. There are women and children who get bombed and killed and mutilated. That's what happens in war.
You don't rape and assault women and children. This is all considered human rights stuff with modern warfare. That's why these things came about. Is because
but even with modern warfare, we drop bombs on civilian populations in order to kill the bad guy. That's not a moral action. It's not justifiable. The indiscriminate, that's the problem. It'd be like, oh, well, okay, so the person who hired the culprit who came in and tried to rob you. And
you're assuming a hiring. I'm trying to make an easier scenario.
I am trying to make the scenario, if this was happening in a neighborhood, some person hired somebody to come in and mug you. But the mugger you end up killing. Well, somebody hired that mugger, so you're going around trying to find the guy who hired him. And by doing so, you're setting his entire house on fire to kill him, but he's also got his wife and kids in there. How is that a moral, justifiable thing? How is that any different from, oh, somebody in your country bombed us or attacked us. Let's go and bomb your entire country. That's the same as setting someone's house on fire because the father in the household hired somebody to do wrong to you. I'm trying to draw that parallel and where the moral wrong comes into play. Because we cannot discriminate when it comes to warfare, it would be no different from going and setting random houses on fire or setting the house of the person you know is responsible on fire, even if there's innocent people in the house. It's the indiscrimination action which makes the act immoral. There is no way to strategically launch a military effort to only target the bad actors.
Yeah, I guess so. So it's just a lose-lose.
Yeah.
There's nothing. Yeah, I got you.
That's what. So okay, and that's a hard thing for me to swallow, right? It's because, okay, so in the military, I never saw combat. I never took a life directly, but I was actively participant in that organization, and that organization, while I was serving, did kill innocent people. I have no way of knowing if my actions directly contributed to any of that. That's something I have to live with. That's something so this is one of the things is like, yeah, I mean, when people ask me about why I left, I'm like, oh yeah, it's, I wanted to go out and do my own thing. No, this is like 70% of the reason I left. And if I try to explain this to someone, they will say, oh, well, that's just crazy. No, you can't hold yourself responsible. I'm like, yes, I can. I very much can hold myself responsible, because if my actions directly led or indirectly led to somebody's death who didn't deserve it, that's on me. That was a choice I made. I didn't know it at the time, but as I learned, I'm like, oh, the more I thought about it and the more I came to these conclusions, the more I was like, I can't do this. I can't stay in this. If I remained ignorant on the subject, I could have stayed in 20 years. But it was the fact that I was no longer ignorant and I had to hold myself responsible. And I'm like, no, I cannot keep participating in a system where my actions lead to this. I kept telling myself when I joined and when I was serving, it's like, oh yeah, but we're killing the bad guys. And yet all of these reports and everything that was released by Bradley Manning, that's now Chelsea Manning, and all of these reports are coming about. It's like, yeah, are we using our drones to attack U.S. citizens that are over in other countries? Are drones, launching bombs into wedding ceremonies because, oh, the terrorist is there? There is no justification for that. And I don't think my actions directly contributed to one of those acts that I know about, but How many more were under the radar? How many more went without being reported back to us? How many more we didn't know if we killed the wrong people or not? Like there's bodies strewn about these countries, and we were like, was that a terrorist attack or was that the US bombing it? Who knows? I was wearing a uniform at the time, and if there is any blood on my hands, I am fully prepared to account for that when my day of judgment comes. But because that's something, and I have no excuse, because this is something I've come to realize, and with the Bible studies I've been doing with the Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff that they're talking about with military in general and serving in. Yeah, I wish I had known prior to serving what I know now. And it's something, because there's a lot of people who are in the Christianity who actively serve or who are proud of their military and support the military and all that. But something that's pointed out to me is there are Christians in our country and there are Christians in other countries. And we both wear uniforms for our countries. And sometimes our countries go to war. And so you have Christians on one side fighting against Christians on the other side. How does that make any sense whatsoever? We have chaplains in our military who are serving, who do have to carry a sidearm in or a firearm of some sort in specific situations. They're not that's not supposed to be, although I've talked to chaplains while serving, and they said, yeah, during when they were deployed to some area, they were given a rifle and said, yeah, if you can never put that down while you're out here. Doesn't matter if you're a chaplain or not, the enemy's not going to make the distinction, and you may have to fire that weapon even if it's against your moral beliefs. But there are people with those religious convictions who have had to take lives in a military situation. Similarly, there are people on the other side who are faithful, devout Christians who are fighting on behalf of their country, and there's Christians killing Christians in the name of their countries. And I was just like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it's contradictory to what Jesus was talking about and what Christians actually should believe and should hold as their morals, their moral standard. It's not something a true Christian could ever associate with. And I know there's a lot of people who, they pray faithfully and they read their Bible all the time, but the fact that they still serve, and I've got a brother right now who is very religious and serving in the military. But I don't know where he stands on all of this, and I've talked about my specific beliefs. And part of the reason why I left the Air Force, but I can't make a decision for him, and I can't tell him. I can say this is what I think is, and this is what the Bible says. But he's got to make the best decision for him and his family. And so this is an area where, yeah, I guess maybe I'm a hypocrite in this, because he's talked about leaving the military and not staying in. And I said, and I advised him, based on your current situation with your family, it just doesn't make any sense for you to leave the military, because what would you do? How would you provide for them? There's so many things to consider. And I think he's going to do a full 20 years in. And I think the difference is because he doesn't see it from my perspective. So but then I've got the moral obligation to try to tell him that. And then if I do, then he's going to be eating himself up, and, because that's what this is tormenting me. I kept myself up late at nights trying to resolve this situation. And
well, I mean, I guess one way to think of it. Okay, so I work for a company, right? We manufacture a product. What if a 3-year-old swallows a product and chokes to death? I work for the company that produced that product.
You're working for a company that their
I didn't
product
create
isn't
the product. I didn't.
The military doesn't.
Young
The military's product is
it.
death. Your company's product is not death.
But even the department you worked in the military wasn't towards death. It was towards IT support. What I'm saying is, yes.
No, it's.
You felt you were in a bad
IT
situation, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But when you look at your brother, what does he facilitate? He doesn't actually get deployed for war. He protects the base.
He protects the base.
That's his duty.
I get that. And he's several steps. He's steps removed from what is going on.
So his duty is just to protect those around him. That's it.
Yeah.
Not to deploy and try and kill. It's just to protect the peace and order and preserve lives. It's his job's function, basically.
Yeah.
But you also have to be in denial that this country could exist without a military, because it can't. No military, we would have been overrun 2 centuries ago. We would have never had the 1776 signing of the Declaration of Independence. It just wouldn't have happened. And it is one of the costs of living here on Earth, is that there's, for some reason, seems to be consistent wars. And I don't know if I ever foresee a point in the future where that won't happen. Just ideologies, ethnicities, and beliefs in different groups always seem to have some sort of difference and throw this wedge in between different sects of humanity for whatever the reason is. So I'm not saying it's good to join the military and want to go out and kill anybody. I agree with you there that it's a hard burden to bear. It's hard to know that you're part of that military machine. But if your intent is to provide for your family and protect loved ones, but not to go out and harm or kill, does that change? Like the chaplains in the military, they never joined to go and end anybody's life. They joined to save lives. They joined to save souls. And they felt that that was the place they were supposed to be, to talk to those men who were on the front lines, who were possibly questioning life's morality, just like you. And to give them peace of mind. Does that put those chaplains in a bad space and say you also supported the war machine?
I would say.
And again, is it wrong to want to defend your country from things such as terrorist attacks? Were we wrong in joining World War II? I don't know. Because what would have happened if the United States had not intervened in that war? I don't know. Therefore, I'm saying you can't entirely beat yourself up, but I do see why you have remorse and doubt over previous choices. I understand that. That's a lot of weight to bear, but I don't think you need to bear it entirely, even with your added knowledge, as in you never had the intention to go out and kill. You just realized that you're kind of in a position you no longer want to be in.
Okay.
So, not to soften the blow, just putting a different perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an issue that.
So I would argue.
I am not sure where the rights.
I think there is objective morality, but I think we as human beings can never fully achieve that objective. And that's human beings as a whole, as individuals, we can strive for.
But here's the so once we establish that there are objective moralities, we have something to pursue. If there are no objective moralities, there's nothing to pursue. That's the no. So if there are no objective moralities, there is no correct way of acting. There's nothing. All actions are equal. With subjective morality, all actions you could possibly take are equal in value to each other. That is where it gets, if there's an objective standard, it's like, okay, there is a correct way that you can act, in which case you should set that as your goal, and you should strive to reach that goal. You may not reach that goal, but as long as you're moving more towards that objective goal, you're heading in the right direction. It's like, so if you're starting on a road trip somewhere, so your road trip and your destination is New York, and you're starting out in St. Louis, well, there are 360 degrees that you could travel, but only one of them is one of those 360 options is traveling that direction is going to get you to New York. And I'm saying as the crows fly. Granted, there's, road pathway, but if you could travel the shortest route to New York from St. Louis, there's only one way that you could go to reach there. It doesn't make any sense to go off on all these other paths. And yet, but that's because New York and St. Louis are objective. Their locations are objective. So if you take that same kind of mentality with morality, if morality is objective and we are at our starting location in St. Louis and New York represents the objective moral standard, well, we've got 359 degrees that don't get us to that goal.
Then perhaps what should be done with that is to keep the moral objective as your top criteria to evaluate a given situation. It may not necessarily always come out with the same objective because it does depend on the situation. You may make a choice depending on who's involved, what the circumstance was. The outcome may be different than what you would have liked, but that should be your number one criteria then.
Oh man, it's already 10:20.
So objective morals could be used as your navigation, your compass, kind of your point to aim for. Mm-hmm. But I think as a human species, just as a whole,
that's a great the compass
built in with us, but a lot of us aren't necessarily at that moral objectivity on our way towards it. And we understand that it's there and should strive for it, but not everybody sees things that way, unfortunately.
Yeah. So compass is an excellent because people talk about your moral compass. Yes, because there is a true magnetic north. That's how we make all of our navigation. If there was no true magnetic north, you couldn't use a compass. You would just any direction, just pick one and go. But there is an objective. There is this is granted, I guess maybe this analogy doesn't quite work because generally you don't want to go to the North Pole. That's not your destination. But you can use that to determine which way you should go. I
don't know. Here, Canada's nice, eh?
No. So I think we got completely sidetracked, and now I'm distracted because I was like, I've got to do something before it's already 10:20, and I've got to submit this thing. So I've got to make changes to that before I go to sleep. Okay. So I think I'm gonna put a pin in the UPB because there's still half of the book that I haven't covered yet or haven't had time to research sorry, not research, but review, because I know at this point in the book he starts using now we've got a situation where you've got something is claimed, and because it's claimed as a moral stance, it can either be immoral or moral. And then you have to look at the factors if it's moral, then everybody has to do it all the time. And that's not feasible for this. So the opposite has to be the moral standard. And then if the opposite is the moral standard, can this be applied consistently? Can it be applied universally? Is it predictive of past moral behaviors? Is it applicable to modern society? Can we start taking this as a moral action? How would that disrupt society? And also, what's it look like in the future? If this was incorporated as a moral standard, would we have how would that impact our future? Would it be a future where there's more people living, being happier, being freer, or is it a situation where more people would be repressed? And so applying those kinds of standards,
there's some gray areas.
Yeah.
So a lot of that. Should I eat donuts at midnight? It's probably not a good choice. Should I open a donut shop and still be open at midnight? Is that immoral?
That has no moral bearing, but whatever.
It's an unhealthy food, and I'm incentivizing people to eat at bad hours of the day to jeopardize their health knowingly. Is that immoral?
I don't know, but you're providing somebody
Sure is
a
tasty.
tasty treat that improves their mood, and even if it's only temporary, maybe that's the thing that it's like, oh well, I was really depressed and was having suicidal thoughts, but then I had a donut.
It's sugar. It helps me.
I don't know. I just know that objective morals exist, and if we've got a situation, a way of determining whether, and maybe this doesn't work on the small things, maybe this doesn't work on the, but it seems to work pretty well on large
universal objective morals, which there are only a handful of.
Yeah.
The rest is subjective and depends on the situation.
Possibly.
I mean, how many objective morals can you think of off the top of your head?
Well, murder, rape, theft, imprisonment.
How's an imprisonment immoral? What if they're a criminal and they have to be separated from the population? We had this discussion earlier in the chat.
So, yeah, we had that. Okay, so I guess wrongful imprisonment, because so if you look at murder, it's not just killing; it's killing with.
So unwarranted imprisonment.
It's unjustified killing.
Ransom or kidnapping, that type of
unjustified killing, unjustified taking people property, unconsensual sex, unwarranted captivity. What's the other? Oh, lying would also be something that is immoral.
That I think is objectionable.
Let's see.
Somebody's dying of cancer and they say, how do you feel? And you're like, hey, I'm doing okay. Is that immoral?
Okay, so that's what that's when he's talking about you can't hold it to the same consistent standards. Like
overall, I think lying should, not necessarily a good thing, but there are instances. Yeah. So hard to say.
Yeah,
I mean,
there are instances where a lie is not going to cause further harm, and telling the truth may cause unnecessary harm,
or grief, or stress, or what have you.
Yeah.
So I mean, right now you've got at least 4 that I would agree with you would be considered moral objectives, or objectively.
Well,
moral.
Okay, so yeah.
But that's less than I can count on one hand.
So maybe instead of lying, if I just say fraud.
Fraud, sure.
So because that is lying to someone with the intention of, swindling them out of something or causing them to do something they wouldn't do otherwise.
Yeah.
So
that's why I'm hypothesizing. I mean, we'll have this discussion further once you've done some more reading. Like I said, put a pin in it, come back to the discussion later. But there's only
I wanted to talk about the Timcast or Tim Pool talking about to Joe Rogan and all that sort of thing. But it's like, we'll save that for next week.
Yeah, that was interesting. I just watched that today.
Yeah. Well, the Alex Jones was interesting too, but
I could not get through. I got through 40 minutes and I gave up. Man, that dude is all over the place. And the bad thing is, it sounds like a nut job, but when you go look up some of the stuff he's talking about, there's a good portion of it that is actually legitimate and true. And it's
it's like, wait a minute, what? This is legitimate?
You could just tell the frustration in Joe's voice and his tone because he couldn't even get half a point in.
Yeah.
Hop to the next point 30 seconds later on something totally different and just never completed a thought.
Yeah.
I was like, man, what is that guy on?
As they say on the internet, Alex Jones is not on cocaine. Cocaine is on Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there was something. Oh, I was looking that up and I forgot all about it. So let me. Gonna hopefully in the stream with this. You want to say something while I'm looking this up real fast? Okay, so
one news report. I was watching somebody else's newscast, alternative media, and they said there's a mayor in South Carolina, I believe. It's a very small city. It's like a population of about 1,000. So she came out one day and her car was covered in a yellow sticky powdery substance.
Mm-hmm.
And her husband's car was covered, so she called the cops and said it was a
What?
racist hate crime, and someone had put some sort of chemical substance on her car.
It was
So
pollen, wasn't it?
Yes. He's determined it was pollen, but she's still stating that that's not true. That's a racist hate crime. And that's the mayor.
Wow.
I don't know who was reporting that. I can't remember, but they're like, "Yeah, we believe we found the culprit," and they put that picture from the B movie. Here's the accomplice. It was a cloud blowing some wind.
Oh, I wish I could find this C.S. Lewis quote because it is. Oh, okay. So I don't remember what this is from exactly. Let's see. I think this is it. No, it is not. This is talking about free will and the existence of evil. I mean, I forget where I heard. Oh, okay. Maybe this is it. Oh, okay. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's C.S. Lewis, and he's saying when he was an atheist, he used to make the claim that if God were good, then if God were truly good, there would be no evil. But there is evil, so God can't be truly good. Oh, sorry, no. The claim is if God is all-powerful and all good, there should be no evil. Because either God is good and wants to eliminate all of evil, but
he's not all powerful.
But he's not all-powerful, so he can't stop all evil. Or he's all-powerful and could stop it, but he's complacent. And so that's actually not C.S. Lewis. That's an argument made by somebody else. I forget the actual person who made the original argument, but C.S. Lewis used to think like that. He said the problem with that is I've already defined evil. How did I define evil without a God? You're saying, oh, well, if God was all good, there would be no evil. It's like, well, you've already defined that there is an evil, which means there's an objective standard. How do you have an objective standard without some... The very idea of things being evil or good implies that there is some ultimate good or some ultimate evil. But how do you get to that while also denying the existence of some ultimate good or ultimate evil? I'm butchering because I mean when I read or saw the C.S. Lewis quote, he put it way more eloquently than I can. But so let's see, because I'm trying to find that exact quote, but I don't have it. Oh, okay. Here it is. My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust, but how had I got the idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. There we go. That's a better summation of the point. Yeah. And this is the Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, a lot of these atheist thinkers, this is where they fall short. They keep saying, you know, they look at the universe and say, oh, there's all this injustice, there's all this cruelty in the world, therefore God can't exist. And it's like, but how do you know that there is unjust without knowing what justice would look like? Yeah. So I wish I would have found that a little sooner. Yeah. But and again, I don't remember which book that is. I think I don't remember which book that's from. But that's a good quote. And sorry, I always butcher quotes on my. That's the only thing I'm good at is butchering quotes. All right.
Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, well, you're just not gonna fool me again.
All right. Oh, yeah. So there's the rest of my notes just talk about the eating ice cream example as being an amoral thing, but I think we covered that.
I think I in fact specifically said something about ice cream.
I think you said donuts, but anyway.
Well, that was a different example. I remember bringing up ice cream, but it was only for a moment.
Yeah.
I was comparing a couple different things.
Yeah. So did you listen to the whole Tim Pool discussion? Because man, Jack Dorsey and that other lady are
I got through most of it. Okay,
so much dishonesty.
My quick impression there. I think what they're doing is listening to the whiny babies, and they don't realize it. I think they do potentially have good intentions.
Nope.
But what they're getting is the really whiny kid gets all the attention, while the one who just grins and bears it and says, "Oh well, I'll just make do with what I've got," doesn't make a peep. So they assume everything's good. Because when that whole comment came out, learn to code, that was from these elitist journalists.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, all you coal miners, all you industrial, mechanical workers and assembly line people, learn to code, get a better education, get a new job. Ha. A couple months later, these journalists are all fired, and so they all turn around and say, oh, remember when you insulted us a few months ago? Learn to code. And then they start crying about it. And so then Twitter says, oh, these select few people are getting attacked by hundreds, if not thousands of people.
Getting attacked.
It must be a massive dog pile. But that's because
dude, that whole mentality behind the dog piling thing is
what is it? 100
silly.
Or so
did you just
made fun of thousands of U.S. citizens, thousands.
Yeah.
Just put them beneath them, rub their shoe in their face, and said, "Learn the code, you piece of garbage." That was basically how they took it, and yet nothing happened to them.
Yeah.
So in reverse,
so when they're losing their jobs, learn to code.
Why don't you learn the code?
Yeah.
So I think Jack and that lawyer lady they're looking at it the wrong way, but it's hard to tell if they're intentionally trying to be leftist or if they're just simply listening to the loudest whiner. Kind of like a parent that has kids, they can tell when their kid is screaming because they want attention or when they're actually hurt. And most good parents will say, ignore that crying. They're just looking for attention. And then as soon as they hear an actual, the kid bumps their head or falls on the ground and starts a real cry, then they're like, oh, gotta go. That's a real cry.
Yeah.
I think they haven't learned to determine what's a legitimate attack or dogpile or what is just common discourse on social media now.
No, I think that's their excuses.
It's hard to say. I mean, I want to think better of people, but
no, I didn't buy any of their excuses. If that was the case, they would have changed their policy years ago.
I'm fairly ignorant as to what that phrase meant.
It's the very fact that she immediately starts talking about it's the pylon and you can't have that on our platform. I'm like, why not? Why can't you have a pylon? What's so bad about a pylon? Like if somebody deserves to be piled on.
If someone came out and said, I'm Hitler, kill the Jews on Twitter, and then he got 500,000 responses saying, I hate you, you deserve to burn in hell, that's not a funny joke. You know how many people died in the Holocaust? And they stood up for Jews that were personally getting killed and put that guy down. He deserves it.
Yeah, he deserves it, and yet he could report them all to Twitter, and then they would get suspended.
So I wouldn't step in the way, and I'd say, dog pile on, man. That guy brought it all on himself.
Yeah.
Should have never said that. So that's the stance I think they should take, but I think
it's
hard to say.
It's a situation where they're trying to.
But you also have to understand the left whines a lot more than the right. The right kind of just fights back when their point has finally been proven true, and then they come back and say, "Ha! In your face, we told you," and then they get persecuted for doing that.
Yeah, and what he was talking about, that one guy, that reporter who was basically the one who was trying to get Alex Jones kicked off of all these platforms, and was the one who got him kicked off of Facebook and
yeah, I don't even see why. I mean,
yeah.
dude sounds like a nut job sometimes, but
yeah.
what? Who cares?
Yeah.
People want to listen to him.
Yeah,
that's not your job to be their parent.
well, that's the thing.
Cannot listen to.
Yeah, so I mean, so don't want to get in a whole other conversation, but yeah, that's the guy, the CNN reporter guy, who was bragging about getting Alex Jones kicked off all these other platforms, and said he was, was saying he was one of the ones responsible for it because he went to the heads of these organizations, and Alex Jones confronting him on that is what got him kicked off of Twitter. And he's like, dude, that really? Are you kidding me? That's one of your reasons as why you kicked him off of your platform. Is like, yeah, can you believe he confronted this guy and called him names? Like,
yeah,
what?
Do you have any idea how much money you cost him? What you did to his audience and his reputation and his network that he's had established for years?
Yeah.
Just
he's got every right to take. Yeah, he's got every right to do that. Okay, hopefully that was the changes I needed to make, and I'll check back in the morning there and see if that was approved. All right. Okay, so I think I'm gonna need to call it a night. It is already well past my bedtime here. And there are some people talking in the chat, but they're a bunch of morons, so who cares what they have to say? And so I think so. You can't call a line crooked unless you've got a straight line to compare it with. So that's what objective morality is. And now, well, I believe that objective morality stems from a creator. People who don't believe in a creator, at least they have some way of determining, they have some line or some consistency to which compare objective morality. So that's why if you haven't read the full UPB book or listened to the entire audio that he's got online, I highly recommend it to anybody who's looking for some kind of objective standard outside of religion. Because right now, religion and the claim of the existence of God seems to be the default one. And when people reject the existence of God, they also similarly throw out all objective morality with it, because they don't quite get that whether there is a God or not, those universal objective standards are requirements for society. You can't have a morally relativist society and still have a society. It falls apart every time, and which is why we're seeing this rapid decay of our own society. It was a rejection of objective moral standards based on a rejection of God. All right, I'm going to end it here. Catch you later.
All right.
Thanks for anybody who did show up, who actually listened to what we had to say instead of making stupid comments. All right, bye.